In all fairness to Governor Scott, I was shown a copy of the rules that they showed me that said there would be no fans on the podium.
This is hell.
Good morning, freaks. This is me getting my thermos together to pour some coffee. This is hell. Manufacturing descent since 1996. Independent from independent radio, alternative to alternative radio. This is not the media. This is hell. I'm your bitter, blind, broke, gap-toothed radio show host, Chuck Mertz. Producing this morning's show on the other side of the glass are Dan Cox. Good morning, Dan.
Good morning, Chuck.
How excited are you about the Bob Fioretti campaign now that Karen Lewis has gotten out of the way for that Bob Fioretti steamroller to take over the mayoral's office?
Well, I'll tell you, I'm ready for Bob Fioretti. Did you know that's actually his little tagline for his campaign? He was handing out shirts or something that said that.
Can you get me any?
Oh, if I can get some, they're probably going for pretty expensive on eBay.
All right, well, try to get one. You got connections? Try to get me one.
I'll see.
All right. Also producing this morning's show, Alex Jerry. Good morning, Alex.
Oh, sorry, I was adjusting my Bob Fioretti comb over.
Sweet. Man, sometimes coffee tastes so good, and especially out of this Michigan mug that says it's the Wolverine state. Oh, thank you. Capital Lansing, statehood, January 26th, 1837. What a fascinating and informative cup, just like this radio show this morning. We're talking about the horrors of racism, the ugliness of sexism, and the ghastly things that are happening in our factory farms. This is Hell is broadcast live over the air every Saturday morning. 4 hours of completely uninterrupted and unedited radio, reporting the news and views that scare the hell out of big media. And we do it right here on Chicago's Sound Experiment, WNUR 89.3 FM, streaming online at WNUR.org/live. Podcast shortly after it, thisishell.com, where you can sign up for our email newsletter. And that's more important than ever because people who have signed up for the email newsletter already have a chance at a prize that other people don't have a chance at. It also, the email sends, which we send to you each and every Monday morning, has a segmented version of the show so you can listen to the entire broadcast or however the hell you want to. Your guests on this morning's This Is Hell are Kevin Alexander Gray. He is co-editor of the new anthology of American violence, Killing Trayvon's, an anthology of American violence. Kevin's piece, No Rights That Any White Man Is Bound to Respect, What It Feels Like to Be Black in America, is one of the feature's essays. He'll tell us what it's like for black kids today who, in the wake of the George Zimmerman decision, have had their personal appearance made legally a threat that can be eliminated with deadly force. Then we'll speak with Katha Pollitt, author of the new book, Pro, Reclaiming Abortion Rights. Katha's Subject to a Debate column appears every other week in The Nation. In 2003, Subject to Debate won the National Magazine Award for columns and commentary. If you thought Roe v. Wade protects women's reproductive rights, Katha has some very, very frightening news for you. Our final guest interview this morning will be with 2014 winner of the National Press Club Award and James Aronson Award for Social Justice Journalism, Ted Genoways. Ted has a new book out entitled The Chain, Farm, Factory, and the Fate of Our Food. A month ago, the author of Against Football, Steve Allman, tried to get me to kick my disgusting football viewing and gambling habits, and he was surprisingly successful in that I am consuming far less football and paying far less attention than I have in years past after considering how disgusting the sport and the business of football really is. Maybe Ted, with his new book on factory farms that focuses on how disgusting the meat processing business is, will get me to stop eating processed meat. Or maybe I'll have a burger stuffed with a hot dog wrapped in bacon during tomorrow's Bears victory over the lowly Miami Dolphins. Stay tuned in to find out. Our irregular correspondent this morning will be live from New York City, skulking about his conspiracy corner. Elvis DeMauro will report to us on all those suspicious banker deaths that have been making my tinfoil hat burst like Jiffy Pop. We'll also have the very first correspondence from our newest irregular correspondent, Anuradha Mittal, who is a director at the Oakland Institute. Anuradha will cover matters concerning development and its impact around the world, especially when it comes to land development. Today, Anuradha will be reporting back to us from last week's creative resistance outside of the World Bank's annual meeting in Washington, D.C., and by extension, that protest was around the world. Of course, as always, we end today's This Is Hell with one single sole moment of truth. One kernel, one nut of truth from Jeff Dorchin live in Los Angeles. Every week, This Is Hell is brave enough to be live, dumb enough to be goofy, and stupid enough to think that we can be a regular part of your Saturday morning hangover. Gentlemen, what's this morning's hangover cure?
This morning's hangover cure is the Filipino, actually Tagalog, tangy and savory meat stew Singjang. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly.
I think you are too.
Singjang consists of tamarind, fish sauce, and something called nuclear bird's eye chili soup, according to one website.
What the hell is that?
I don't know, it sounds good though.
It does.
The meat in Singjang is often stewed with the tamarinds, as well as tomatoes, garlic, and onions. Most Filipinos like to cook Singjang with green long peppers in order to enhance the taste and add a little spice to the dish. There's plenty of spicy broth hangover cures that we've introduced you to on This Is Hell, and this just adds another one to that long list. So this morning's hangover cure is the Tagalog meat stew Singjang.
That sounds delicious, doesn't it? I wonder where there's a place in town to get Filipino food. There used to be over on Clark near Montrose. I wonder, there's a Filipino barbecue over on Albany. That's right,
This
Albany
seems
of
like
Irving Park.
Alex might know this one.
By the way, I'm always ripping on the start of the show recently. Not always, but recently I've been ripping on this stupid thing on the front page of the Chicago Tribune that they do every Saturday. It's called the Saturday Planner. And the Saturday Planner on the front page of the Chicago Tribune reads like the Saturday Planner would read in, let me think of a really small town newspaper. How about the Great Lakes Pilot? How about the Northwest Indiana Press Herald? Or Post Herald, I believe. Post Tribune, that's what it is. Northwest Indiana Post Tribune. They all sound like they're coming from a very, very small town. And it's really embarrassing. It makes Chicago look like a real podunk town. For instance, this is one of the 4 things they have on the Saturday Planner today. Here's something you can do in Chicago. So You Think You Can Dance Season 11 Tour. The So You Think You Can Dance Season 11 Tour has come to Chicago. Now, do you think that this would ever make the arts section in the New York Times, the New York Post, the LA Times, the San Francisco Chronicle? Chicago just comes off as so podunk in the stupid Saturday Planner thing every week. And not only that, the stupid So You Think You Can Dance Season 11 tour, they couldn't even get a place to do it here in Chicago because nobody wants them here. It's in Maryville, Indiana, so it probably is in the Post Tribune, the Northwest Indiana Post Tribune, has something to do. So there's nothing different from the Northwest Indiana Post Tribune and the Chicago Tribune today. But they do have something good in the Saturday Planner. And so I just wanted to point it out. Every so often, there is something good in the Saturday Planner. I know it's going to sound boring to a lot of people out there, but it is really cool. Open House Chicago is going on. You got to find out more by going to openhousechicago.org. It's happening from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. today and tomorrow here in Chicago. It's this opportunity to go behind the scenes and get to look at all the amazing architecture here in the city that you usually don't have access to. For instance, there's a Frank Lloyd Floyd Wright home over at Devon and Sheridan that I really have never been into and I really want to go to, so I'm going to be going to that hopefully today, maybe tomorrow. openhousechicago.org. This is the best way to look at some of the best architecture in the city without breaking and entering. Tonight, by the way, is the very last night of the new Theater Oobleck show, Baudelaire in a Box, Episode 7, The King of Rain. The seventh installment in Oobleck's epic attempt to translate the entirety of Charles Baudelaire's Les Fleurs du Mal features man, I am just jacked up on caffeine this morning. Features 15 new cantastorias designed and illustrated by This Is Hell correspondent Dave Buchan, with music and translations by Emmy Bean, T. Roy Martin, Chris Schoen, and Sad Brad Smith. They'll be joined by Ronnie Cutler on accordion and violin and Joseph Spielberg on bass. It's called The King of Rain, and it happens tonight, last night, 8 p.m. at the Charnel House, 3421 West Fullerton in Chicago. $15 suggested donation, free if you're broke, but more if you've got it. To find out more, go to Theater Oobleck, that's OOBLECK.com. Isn't post-racial America, where an unarmed black kid can be gunned down in the street and nobody is punished, isn't our post-racial America fantastic? To tell us why it's not so great, Kevin Alexander Gray is co-editor with past This Is Hell guests Joanne Vipjeski and Jeffrey St. Clair at the of the new anthology of American violence, Killing Trayvons. Kevin's piece, No Rights That Any Man Is Bound to Respect, What It Feels Like to Be Black in America, is one of the featured essays. Gentlemen, I thought I was giving him an intro because the music had gone down. Apparently, that was not the case.
Sorry, we're struggling. He's going to be just on the air in a second.
I got you. That's all right. By the way, our question from hell for you, our listening audience for this week. It's fall, and no amount of probably carcinogenic pumpkin spice additive can get the taste of bile out of our mouths when we walk past whatever dopey campaign yard signs are littering the neighborhood. So we want to know, what would you put on your campaign yard sign to piss off your neighbors? The best two responses get a copy of Naomi Klein's new book, This Changes Everything, which everyone is talking about. We'll be reading some of those responses on the air right after our interview with Kevin Alexander Gray. You can leave your comments at our Facebook page. Like us on Facebook, and the post is right there where you can leave your response, and maybe your response is one that will get a Naomi Klein book. As I was saying before, I'm going to do my whole intro again, Kevin. Isn't post-racial America, where an unarmed black kid can be gunned down in the street and nobody is punished, isn't our post-racial America great? To tell us why it's not so great, Kevin Alexander Gray, co-editor with past This Is Hell guests Joanne Vipjeski and Jeffrey St. Clair of the new anthology of American violence, Killing Trayvons. Kevin's piece, No Rights That Any White Man Is Bound to Respect, What It Feels Like to Be Black in America, is one of the featured essays. Whole bunch of other past This Is Hell guests, including one of our very favorites, Glenn Ford, is featured in those essays as well. Good morning, Kevin.
Good morning.
Kevin is also author of Waiting for Lightning to Strike, The Fundamentals of Black Politics, and is organizer at the Harriet Tubman Freedom House Project. But more importantly, because we're doing radio, let's plug a radio show. Kevin broadcasts the radio show live from the land of hopes and dreams Sundays from 4 to 5 p.m. on Sirius Satellite Radio, Channel 146. The name of your book, again, Killing Trayvons, in reference to the Florida jury acquittal of George Zimmerman for killing Trayvon Martin. The summer of 2013 was the summer of Trayvon. Now the summer and fall of 2014 is the summer and fall of Ferguson, Missouri. Are these events related in that Ferguson is, to some extent, Ferguson because of Trayvon? Are these all part of something that is an ongoing, evolving event, simmering in the background, waiting for a spark, and each time that spark happens, the fire it causes is hotter and hotter? Is there a connection other than them both being racially motivated and deadly violence between Trayvon and Ferguson? And if there is, what is it?
Now, I hope that's not a question, because that's a very long question.
Hey, look, we got 35 minutes, Kevin. That's why I take all the time we can.
Oh, man, that was a very long question. Well, listen, it just so happened I had a conversation with a friend of mine, Ifia now in Gaza, who was in Ferguson last week, and she was very optimistic about the state of I won't call it rebellion per se, but the state of organizing in the youth community where Ferguson can go. But, of course, the connection is the violence inflicted upon people of color. And it's not just black men, it's black women, it's brown people, it's people in foreign lands. It's the culture of violence that's been America since the beginning of America, from the enslavement and kidnapping of Africans to the genocide of the Native Americans. So, we have to look at everything in context. The idea that Trayvon Martin or Mike Brown is an anomaly is not borne out by the fact that once every 28 hours a person of color is killed by somebody under the color of law or by law enforcement, and that's the link. And the idea of my piece is that historically, people of color, blacks in particular, have had no rights that any white man is bound to respect. The idea of skin privilege is where you're never considered a suspect, that a young white kid filming a cop can ask a cop his name, and the cop can tell the kid, none of your effing business, and the white kid can say, hey, officer, none of your effing business, and not get killed. That's, if a black kid had said that, they'd still be shooting him. But, it's as long as can remember as a black man in America and a black kid in America, it's always been dangerous between people of color and black men in particular and power, or people that think they have power. And part of what we're trying to, the story we're trying to tell with the Trayvon Martin story and the killing Trayvons, plural, is that it's gone on and on and on and on, and we have to start talking about responses to it, and we have to talk about it up front, and we have to talk about all the issues that come from it, from how do we interact with the police, when enough is enough, what is rebellion, what is the symbolism of protest, what are the concrete things that you demand and such. Under such conditions, be it Ferguson or be it Sanford, Florida, or be it Columbia, South Carolina, be it anywhere, be it New York, be it Oakland, how do you respond to it? And the interesting thing that's coming out of Ferguson isn't such a new idea. It's the idea of citizens review boards and some type of civilian oversight of the police department. And now we're having national discussions about the police state and the militarization of the police department. So all of it is a mash. All of it is one thing. It's all white supremacy and the structures of white supremacy, and it's all about America, where I think it was H. Rap Brown once said, "America is violent. Violence is as American as apple pie."
See, now that's the exact kind of answer I want with a super long question. Thank you very much, Kevin.
A super long answer.
See, that works out perfect. And you were talking about how this has also led to conversations about the militarization of police, and it's even gone beyond that. It's led to discussions about property seizure and how that works within the police department and how dependent they are for the property seizure when it comes to funding things that are very militaristic.
And that's the point. I mean, the point is, if we're going to talk about why it is that police feel like they have carte blanche to impose the death penalty on the street. Mm-hmm. The number one driver of that right now is the war on drugs. So we ought to be having a discussion about legalization and decriminalization and the war on drugs. Instead of, we've gotten all these referendums in the very liberal states of Colorado or Washington State, and the drug reform debate goes on in the white community. It doesn't go on in the black community. And so we have to have this discussion about racial profiling, the racial profiling that is right now the tool of profiling is the war on drugs. And we've got to move beyond just having these discussions. And, the drug reform community seems to move from medical marijuana to legalization, and that's their track. But in the black community, there's no discussion. And of course, if you have all these police encounters to where they're going after the low-hanging fruit in the drug war, and that's the street drug dealers, and where the numbers say that blacks are 12% of the drug users in the country, but 85% of the arrest, and you've got all the canine corps and the drug suppression teams, and when you stop for a traffic violation, you're surrounded by 2 and 3 police cars, and then here comes the dogs, and all your stuff is on the ground, and or when, even in the case of Ferguson, when Michael Brown goes into the local store and he buys his blunts, and then people start talking about drugs, and that's why Officer Wilson could impose his will, because he, kids smoke dope, and when you in the cases of violence where police will kill a black man or a black woman, when you say drugs, everybody stops listening. So we have to have that discussion in this whole Trayvon Martin, Michael Brown, police violence, power conversation.
Kevin, I have 25 pages of questions for you, and what I love about doing this show, this live show where we can have these long-form interviews, is that it actually becomes a conversation. It's not just a scripted discussion, because you brought up so many different points that I didn't even consider when I was reading your work, when I was reading the introduction to your book, Killing Trayvons, when I was reading your essay in Killing Trayvons. It was some things that I didn't even consider, never even came up. And one thing that you were just mentioning is this different perspective on the war on drugs. This just shows you kind of how my blinders are on. I never really thought about how especially the recreational marijuana movement is so pushed by the white community. You do not see black people at those kinds of rallies, at those, when you finally saw recreational marijuana legal in Washington and Colorado, and they showed people out on the street, it wasn't black people out on the street who were smoking like crazy. It was all white people.
You have to find the black people in jail, because that's where they are.
Right.
That's right.
And this leads to another question, because you were talking about entitlement earlier on. This is completely anecdotal, but I was talking to a beat officer here in Chicago who's African American. He said that they would, it's essentially, there's a stop and frisk policy here in Chicago, but there isn't. There is no stop and frisk policy in Chicago. But what they do is they have these tech teams, and what these tech teams do is if you see three black kids who are 15 or over standing together at a corner, you roll up on them and you frisk them and you see if they're carrying anything. And this black officer told me, and the most depressing thing is, most of the time we find one of those kids has drugs on them.
And how different
right.
is stopping a group of black kids from the black codes and the slave codes, where when 2 or 3 blacks during Jim Crow, during slavery, when 2 or 3 blacks gathered together, then that was illegal, because they were plotting, either in the case of the black codes, crime; in the case of the slave codes, slave rebellion. So it doesn't ever change.
Right, and the other thing I would say, because this officer was very depressed about it, he was very saddened by the fact that it had such an outcome on a fairly regular basis. And I would just say to him, if myself and 2 of my friends are walking down the street and we're all white, I'm betting one of us has some pot on him too.
And the sad thing about it is this idea of the demonization of drugs and the criminalization of people that have drug problems is part of this discussion on drug policy reform that we ought to be having, in the mix of why police feel as though they have so much power. Now, there's also the fear that empire has. Capitalism is taking a beating because the 1% is getting richer while everybody else is getting poorer and paying more. And power tries to anticipate disruption. And power tries to anticipate where they think the disruption will come from, the core disruption. And in the context of American politics, it's always been about white guilt or white fear that black folk might finally realize that they're getting the short end of the stick. So it's why we talk about guns in this country and gun crimes and the number of guns in this country, but who has the guns? The majority of guns in this country are owned by whites. Now, and so everybody, you come up with this idea that white America and the country is always preparing for a race rebellion.
A couple of things. First of all, when you mention, You were talking earlier about how your friend was in Ferguson. They were saying they were hopeful of some sort of revolution or rebellion starting up, and I am hoping for some positive outcome of what happens in Ferguson. Unfortunately, as Glenn Ford has pointed out on our show, and he's got a book about it, he's very critical of the black leadership class.
The black misleadership.
Right, the black misleadership class, exactly. And what came of the 60s and the 70s civil rights movement, unfortunately, was that black misleadership class. What I am fearing are these two things. Number one, the solution to Ferguson will be we'll just have new black elected officials who will end up joining that same black misleadership class. Or two, the reaction will be, well, if we just control guns, because it seems no matter what the situation is, the answer is if we can just control guns, and then guns don't get controlled, and then the next time another event happens, they have that exact same script ready. Do you think that those are the most likely two outcomes of things like the situation in Ferguson, where we'll just be electing new black officials who may mislead the black population, or that we'll just have the knee-jerk reaction of trying to reform gun laws?
Well, look, I'm thinking of a pithy line. I mean, it's always darkest before the dawn. We've got to talk about a progressive revolution in a positive sense, in a progressive, peaceful revolution, and what changes American society. And right now we're in a period in which the model of black leadership is a corporate model. I mean, Obama is the corporate model. On the local level, everybody has more or less moved into that DLC corporate model over the years. I mean, that's the residue of Bill Clinton and the Democratic Party and what it represents. This idea of blue dog liberalism, I guess you could call it, or empire with a nicer face, and that's ultimately what we have to combat. And so part of me being on this show, part of what goes on in Ferguson is to try to make the links between the past and the present, to bring some continuity back into black and progressive liberation politics, and to challenge the corporate model. And I'm hoping that Ferguson and what is sparked in Ferguson will lead us to having those discussions and creating a movement that makes black elected officials more accountable to a progressive cause. And I mean, we still have to participate in government, and but the idea is we have to hold people more accountable, and we have to demand that they do something that's progressive. And part of that is understanding your history and understanding how you got where you are. Our movement, the so-called black progressive movement, has been about expansion of due process rights, equal protection, equal treatment, economic justice, and that ought to be what a progressive revolution is about across the country. How do we lessen the wealth gap? How do we create a more egalitarian society? How do we create a more peaceful society? How do we combat this idea of violence, either through the police or amongst each other, or how we impose it on other nations? You have to hope for that. Part of the problem also is with a lot of black politicians and who we put in office is that you have to support them. You have to not let them become captives of the corporate dollars and the big money and those interests that have their ear. So, I think it's a work in progress, no question. There are only a few black elected officials in this country that I have any confidence in, and there are only a few white elected officials that I have confidence in. But we have to dismantle the so-called structure of white supremacy. That's the central focus of our movement, and I'm hoping that Ferguson can make the connections between what's happening in law enforcement and how it protects white supremacy and white privilege.
We are speaking with Kevin Alexander Gray. He is co-editor of the new anthology of American violence, Killing Trayvons. We have a direct link to where you can purchase the book directly from the publisher at our website, thisishell.com. Kevin has one of the featured essays in the book. He is organizer of the Harriet Tubman Freedom House Project, and he broadcasts the radio show live from the land of hopes and dreams, Sundays from 4 to 5 p.m. on Sirius Satellite Radio, Channel 146. You were
Now,
just...
I've let you say that twice, and we went off the air in March.
Get out of here.
No, you know what? We did it 8 years, and that was a long time to do a radio
I didn't know you went off the air.
Yeah, I'm so glad. So you should have been listening to us.
Oh, jeez. Well, now I know that there's an open slot from 4 to 5 p.m. on Sundays on Sirius. Maybe I'll jump right on that, my friend.
3 to 5. That was that's 3 hours a week for 8 years.
Well, I've been doing 4 hours a week for 16 years, so I'm just about to hang myself.
No sympathy. I guess I started out in radio. I started out in radio back in the 60s I guess it was the 70s in high school. And the first radio gig I had was with a country music station late at night. And back in the 60s and 70s in the South, the only time you got black programming was after midnight. So I came up in that era. I've got some young kids working for me that were born in the 90s, and I just, they don't even believe that we landed on the moon.
They don't even know a radio exists.
That's right.
You were talking about President Clinton, and whenever I've been critical of President Clinton's economic policies on the show, I point out the Pew study that came out right at the end of his presidency that showed that only people in the upper middle class and above were people who took any advantage of the economic boom during the Clinton era. Whenever I mention that on the show, I'll get emails from people who tell me, well, Black America did a lot better off economically, financially during the Clinton years than at any other time in the United States.
And which is just a bogus because it set us up for the subprime meltdown. If you go back and look at his civil liberties record, just absolutely awful.
Right, that's what I wanted to ask you. If let's say he did actually help out the bottom line of the average African American, is that enough, or does there need to be something more than economic justice? Does there need to be social justice, not just economic justice?
I don't know if I buy into the supposition that things were better under Clinton. I don't know if the economic data, when you look at that, will bear that out. I think that for black politics, black progressive politics, Clinton was awful. I think the whole idea of his civil liberties and civil rights policy and him being a civil rights president in any regard was awful. More young black males went to jail under Bill Clinton than under Ronald Reagan. The idea of the assault, which I just think is egregious, on civil rights for people that live in public housing and all the drug testing and what it did for people on the bottom end with his housing programs, I think was Hope 4 or maybe Hope 6. It was Hope something. And where poor people were scattered from the inner cities at the beginning of gentrification, the idea that a lot of the people that fell out of the job market aren't counted in the so-called economic progress that we found under Bill Clinton. I just don't buy it. I think he was a war president. If you look at the extension of the Iraqi war from Bush to Clinton to Bush to Obama, and then it's all been the same since I guess Reagan. We're still in the era of Reagan, and so I don't give Clinton the credit that a lot of people give him. I didn't support Clinton. I didn't vote for Bill Clinton. Anytime he ran, I was a Jesse Jackson Democrat. I supported Tom Harkin. And it being that Barack Obama is a Bill Clinton DLC Democrat, didn't vote for him. So I just think that the wealth gap, the housing crises that black people still endure, the unemployment problem that we still, we're still double the national average. The unemployment is way higher than it was even when Dr. King was giving his Other America speech. I think this myth of Bill Clinton being great white father is vastly overstated.
A couple of years ago, maybe 2 or 3 years ago, we were speaking with University of Wisconsin professor Alfred McCoy, and he was warning us that back then, and I think this was back in 2000 2007 or 2008, 2007 actually. He was warning us that the drone campaign that was going on under the Bush administration in Afghanistan and Iraq and Pakistan and Yemen, wherever it was going on at the time, he was warning us that that kind of campaign and anything that you do in a war always comes back home and then is done to the domestic populace rather than just happening somewhere overseas. In your book, right at the very beginning, you write about this connection, you and the other co-editors of the book in the introduction, you write about this connection to what's happening between Israel and Palestine to what's happening here in the United States. What do these acts of racism in the U.S. have to do with the plight of Palestinians, which with checkpoints, invasions, occupations, would appear to be more systemic, far more institutional than the violent events that African Americans face, even if those happen every day?
I came across a new term, new to me, although I should have realized it when I first saw it. It wasn't so new. Settler politics and the settler mindset. I mean, this idea that the settler is right, the settler in his wagon going out and conquering the savages, it's all good. I mean, be it the United States and Manifest Destiny or the Voltrekkers in South Africa and their fight to impose apartheid on South Africans, or the chosen people who move back to Israel because they think that they have biblical title to land. It's all the same. It's the power of empire, and even when you talk about the creation of empire and the nexus of all that, it's all from the same source, and it's all about white supremacy. So, I mean, how it's applied in America, or how it's applied in Africa, or how it's applied in Israel, it's pretty much all the same. And folk ought to see those connections. And oftentimes, some of the weapons that we use at war, but this country uses at war against the enemy of the moment, they bring it back home, or they've already practiced these things here at home in the black community among those people that they think are the most powerless. And so those are the connections. How the police view black people as drug-addled animals, and or the Israelis view Palestinians as animals firing rockets off into their cities as they counter with gunships and U.S. supplied weapons. That's the parallels are there. This idea of drone warfare and surveillance. Well, who's going to be surveilled in this country? Obviously Muslims in this country are being surveilled, but when you go back and look who's in jail, the majority of people in jail are black and poor people. So that's where it comes down. And if you're progressive, you have to keep saying to yourself, it is racial, but it's also economic. It's the 1% trying to keep in control of everything. And as long as they can divide the poor black, poor white, poor brown, they stay in power. And so that's, when you talk about race, you have to be careful to say, but it's more than just about race. It's about a structure of people in power wanting to maintain their power.
So if we had a less militant foreign policy, do you think there'd be less violence at home? Or is that an impossibility because, as you were pointing out early on in our conversation, there's such a history of violence in America and almost an American cultural or societal embrace of violence?
I mean, I write about it, but I'm optimistic that you have to think that you can be better and that people want to live better, and better is peace as opposed to war. And when your country is constantly at war, it's very hard to have the moral authority to say, violent. We ought not be violent individually toward one another. We ought not do this or that. If we're killing people, if the government sanctions killing, and it's it uses killing to teach a lesson, it's really hard to have the moral authority to tell people to stop killing one another. So, I think our foreign policy ought to be consistent with what we say or who we say we are. We're a secular nation. We ought to be supporting secular democratic nations. We ought not be supporting dictatorships. We ought not be supporting monarchs and sheiks We ought not be supporting theocracies. We're not a theocracy. We ought to fight against theocracy in this country. Separation of church and state, and that ought to be at the core of our foreign policy. A respect for human rights and the individual right of everyone to live, of everyone to exist. That's what we ought to be about.
Let's talk fear for a little bit. You write, it shouldn't have mattered if Trayvon Martin were walking along carrying a bag of reefer or a rap sheet that night, just as it shouldn't have mattered if he threw the first punch. Such an act might have been wrong, might have been stupid, but the brawling of boys and men is a hearty staple of the rugged individual story America tells its children. It takes a jacked-up disdain for proportionality to conclude that execution is a reasonable response to a fistfight. So now we're talking about proportionality, which is something discussed when it comes to Israel's response to rockets from Gaza. How much do you think that overreaction, if you will, is driven by fear? Does less fear lead to more of a targeted rather than a carpet bombing approach?
Look, I'm reticent to talk about Israel and Palestine because I'm leaving for Israel and Palestine on Sunday.
Well, watch it, because one of our correspondents just lost his visa to go to Israel. So yes, let's reel that in a little bit.
Yeah, I want to see what I want to see when
Okay.
I get there, and I publicly admitted that. I want to see, and because I've written about the plight of the Palestinians. I believe that Palestinians have a right of self-defense. Anyone has a right of self-defense. And when you're talking about settlers taking land and taking people's lives and believing that these people whose land you've taken are animals, being that I am a descendant of an enslaved African, well, that's what I relate to. And as a secularist, I don't relate to people with a certain ethnic or religious heritage having more rights than people of another group. I just don't believe in that. And I think that everybody, Israelis and Palestinians, blacks, whites, people have a right to exist. And so, I just want to see what I want to see. But I am 57 years old. I remember when Israel supported South Africa,
Right.
and helped South Africa develop the nuclear bomb just in case they had to use the nuclear bomb. My politics are progressive, radical, and I believe that I'm still probably a one-stater. I believe that Palestinians and Israelis ought to live to be able to live together. I don't believe in the politics of segregation. So, as I said, I'm going to Israel next week with the Interfaith Peace Builders, and it will be my first trip to the Middle East. And I'm trying, as much as I've written about it, and I haven't been there, I'm still trying to open my mind up for what I'm about to experience.
You write in your book how Cornel West calls President Obama, a global George Zimmerman. The president profiles brown people as enemies every Tuesday for an assassin's hit list. But here's Julia Edwards and Dave Ingram in Reuters on September 25th following Eric Holder's announcement that he was stepping down as U.S. Attorney General. Eric Holder, an unapologetic liberal voice and one of President Obama's closest allies, said he would step down. Holder forcefully embodied many of the president's most liberal positions, including support for more gun control, criticism of America's prison system, and a desire to try terrorism suspects in civilian instead of military courts. Holder made civil rights a cornerstone of his tenure, bringing a series of cases against local police for using excessive force and so on. So how great of a champion of civil rights was Eric Holder, and does that counter any idea that President Obama is a global George Zimmerman?
Yeah, let's take the question separate. President Obama is a global George Zimmerman.
Okay.
And, the idea that every Tuesday you decide who's going to die without due process. Well, let's make the link between Darren Wilson killing Michael Brown. Where was the due process there? You just decide that you're going to exact the death penalty, and you have that power. So, that's, I didn't even think that President Obama had any moral authority to talk about what happened with Michael Brown or even what happens with Trayvon Martin, because he doesn't have any moral authority. That's separate from Holder, who I think, for the most part, has been a decent attorney general. I mean, a lot of folk are harder on him than I am. But considering he represents the power structure, he did more than what his boss did. Now, you have to give his boss credit for hiring him for the investigation and interest in the Zimmerman case and what's going on in Ferguson, and the willingness to talk about police violence, the taking on the voter ID laws. You have to give him credit for that. But and being an elder black presence in Obama's administration, being that for the most part, President Obama is good at what his predecessors were good at, and that's white boy politics, white boy power politics, because that's what he got around him. Holder was the exception. So I'll give him credit for that. But as far as that making President Obama any less of a global George Zimmerman, it doesn't. The United States government under President Obama has begun an assassination program that many of the people of my age fought against when we were coming up, and nobody's taking them on this. And when you talk about moral authority and ending the cycle of violence, I mean, this idea of war and killing without due. We ought not. I don't believe in the death penalty in any regard, but this idea of no due process at all before a government takes a life, and the government tells you just trust us, we're killing the right people. That's a horrible legacy that the president has to carry with him, and he's given that power to the next person that comes behind him, and that's a horrible legacy. We ought to be trying to roll back some of the overreaches and reaction to 9/11, as opposed to institutionalizing more and more government intrusion and government right to kill without any kind of process and in secret.
We have been speaking with Kevin Alexander Gray. Kevin, I've got one last question for you. Kevin is co-editor with past This Is Hell guest Joanne Vipcheski and Jeffrey St. Clair of the new anthology of American violence, Killing Trayvons. He has a piece in the collection called No Rights That Any White Man Is Bound to Respect, What It Feels Like to Be Black in America. Past guests, including Glenn Ford, have essays featured in here. Kevin is a civil rights and liberties activist in South Carolina, author of Waiting for Lightning to Strike, The Fundamentals of Black Politics, the former host of the radio show Live from the Land of Hopes and Dreams, which you can no longer hear on Sundays from 4 to 5 p.m. on Sirius Channel 146. One last question for you, Kevin, and it's our question from hell. The question we hate to ask, you might hate to answer, our audience is going to hate your response. Back on August 8th, one of a past guest of ours, Michael J. Glennon, one of his colleagues at Tufts University, had this column in Washington Post I want to tell you about. Michael Glennon was on our show because he has a book out called Double Government and National Security Policy, and how that national security policy is often driven by fears that are exaggerated by those making that policy. So back on August 8th, one of Michael's colleagues at Tufts University, Daniel Dresner, a professor of international politics at the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy and a non-resident senior fellow at Brookings Institution, writes in the Post, there has been one interest group that has repeatedly doubled down on the notion that everything is falling apart and the time to panic is now. He dismisses the government. He dismisses the military-industrial complex. He dismisses politicians. He says it's all about the National Rifle Association. In its modern incarnation, the NRA has toggled between two forms of political rhetoric to advance the idea of gun rights. The libertarian track warns that gun control measures restrict individual freedoms at the expense of more government power. The apocalyptic track warns that in a world of dangerous actors, the state will be unable to defend Americans. There's been a lot more of the latter and the former in recent years. So Dresner says there's one group and one group alone that is most behind the spread of fear in the the U.S., and it's the NRA. Is the impact of the NRA on African Americans unique to that of white Americans, and how much do you think the fear that Dresner suggests the NRA fans is behind violence towards African Americans?
Now that's another long question.
See, and it's a question from hell, too.
That is a question from hell. Look, my brother, I believe that everybody has the right to self-defense. Now, if the government of the United States of America, the police in particular, if everybody going to turn in their guns, because I don't want to live in the country where the government has all the guns.
Right.
Personally. Now, so and I think what happens with this attack on the NRA is that people don't realize, first of all, there's more than NRA. There's Gun Owners of America. There's the right to keep and bear arms. There's open carry people, and they're organized. And then how many guns are in this country? Who knows?
More than people.
More than people. And the majority of them are owned by white folk. And some of that is fair black people. But, you're not going to get these white folks guns. And that's not an issue I would take them on. I would say black folk might need some guns. I'm sorry, my brother. I'm not, I think if you start sending the police into people's houses to confiscate their guns, then you'll see white folk up in arms. And then you'll see some trouble in the land. Black folk ain't killing white folk, and they sure ain't killing cops. But, I don't believe in the police state. And if only the police and only the government has guns, and already black folk die with impunity at their hands, I think things get worse. See, one of the things that police got to know, if they're going to continue this rampage or ramp up this rampage of killing black folk, they got to know that shit can come back on them, excuse me. And that's how I feel about it. I'm not saying to anybody to go out and shoot back at police or do violence. I'm saying don't do violence. But police got to know, that's what regulates police in this country, that they're just not going to have people living under fear, that there's consequences for that. And this idea of trying to you'll never make the NRA the boogeyman in the black community. Maybe that might happen in the white liberal community, but the NRA is not the issue that black folk are concerned about. They're concerned about feeding their families and educating their kids and being able to have a roof over their head, which is becoming harder and harder because it's hard to find a job, and it's hard, and because the 1% cutting pensions, cutting the safety net, cutting government programs that help people move up and to some sense of security. That's what people are worried about, and they're worried about police using guns with impunity. That's what people are worried about. They're not worried about, from my perspective, from where I'm in the South, that's what most people are concerned about. They're not concerned about the NRA. That is a Democratic Party boogeyman and a waste of time.
Kevin, that is a fantastic answer from hell for a question from hell. Kevin, I really appreciate you being on the show with us this morning. Your book that you co-edited, Killing Trayvons, is a fantastic book. You should also check out Kevin's book, Waiting for Lightning to Strike, The Fundamentals of Black Politics. Do not listen to Sirius XM radio anymore because Kevin is no longer on there. There's no reason to listen anymore.
I hope I didn't offend the censors. I bleep it out, brother. That's all I can
It's live radio. It's too late now. My producer looked at the 7-second delay and went, too late. All right, well, Kevin, I really appreciate you being on the show with us. I got your email address now, which is bad news for you because I'm going to ask you to come back on the show.
I won't use profanity the next time. I'm sorry. It just slipped out, my brother.
You owe me $1. Don't leave town.
All right.
All right, I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you. This is Hell. Every Saturday morning at 9 a.m. We're going till 1 p.m. Wow, did I enjoy that interview. How about you, Alex?
The thing is, I looked at the 7-second delay button like 3 seconds in.
No, if you're not there with your finger on the button, it doesn't really work.
Although the thing that I did learn in my hour of training at WNUR was if someone says a bad word, never acknowledge it. So I think you guys also broke that rule.
All right, so question from hell. It's fall, and no amount of probably carcinogenic pumpkin spice additive can get the taste of bile out of our mouths when we walk past whatever dopey campaign yards are littering the neighborhood. So we want to know, what would you put on your campaign yard sign to piss off your neighbors? The best two responses get a copy of Naomi Klein's new book, This Changes Everything: Capitalism versus Climate Change, a book that everyone is talking about. So, what would you put on your campaign yard sign to piss off your neighbors? Well, Jeff Dorchin, the guy who delivers the moment of truth each and every week here at the end of This Is Hell, he said his campaign sign would say, "Kill a gay puppy for Christ." I questioned that on Facebook, and I said, would that really actually piss off your neighbors, Jeff? Tamara writes, "Walmart for Congress. We own you, bitch." Which, that's pretty fantastic. Lisa says, "Rauner, 2016. That is the guy who is running, Bruce Rauner, running for governor here in the state of Illinois. So apparently Lisa would really piss off the other Chicagoans around her if she had a Republican for governor sign in her front window. Ryan writes, closed schools, ban Christmas." I like "closed schools, ban Christmas." That's a nice campaign sign. I like that. I had an idea for what would piss off my neighbors. That's if I posted a racist sign like the one in New York City that compared Palestinians to savages. Well, I am glad I have the right to display such a sentiment in the good old US of A. I'm even happier that I will be exercising my right to not be that big of an a-hole. And then I have a link at our Facebook page to the article, "Controversial Anti-Muslim Ads Coming to New York City," and that was only came out in late September. So if you think this is a story from earlier in the summer, no, there are more offensive signs that are being posted. Let's see, who else do we have from Indie Radio? Okay. Rich says the campaign sign on his front lawn that was piss off all of his neighbors is, "In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Socialism, the religious left party." Eddie writes, "Keep Pilsen Brown." What? Which I kind of like too. Robert writes, "Never win. It's not your fault. We'll blame a system so you can feel righteous, you idiot." So those are our responses to the question from hell so far. Later on in this morning's show, we'll be picking two of these that will receive a free copy of the new Naomi Klein book, This Changes Everything: Capitalism versus Climate Change. And right now, boy, I gotta say, I like Tams. And I like, boy, keep Pilsen Brown. That's a toughie. We'll see what happens. We'll see if another one comes in that really jumps out at me. By the way, Naomi Klein, her book, again, This Changes Everything: Capitalism versus Climate Change. She is going to be here in Chicago next Wednesday, October 29th. So a week from Wednesday, October 29th, at the Drake Hotel, 140 East Walton Place. Registration is at 5:30. Presentation and audience Q&A begins at 6. Then there's an adjournment and a book signing afterwards at 7:15. This is again happening a week from Wednesday. Naomi Klein, journalist and author, Puffin Foundation writing fellow at the Nation Institute, will discuss her new book, This Changes Everything: Capitalism versus Climate Change. To get tickets to this event, I really don't know. I can't remember. Oh, this is how you do it. You go to the website for the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. The Chicago Council on Global Affairs. And you can find out how to register for this event. I think tickets are $10 if you're a member, $20 if you're not, or something like that. So if you are interested in seeing Naomi Klein, again, a week from Wednesday, October 29th, at the Drake Hotel, she will be discussing capitalism versus the climate. Starts at 5:30 for registration, 6 p.m. for presentation and audience Q&A, adjournment, and a book signing afterwards, so you can actually speak to Naomi yourself. And if you win, copy of her book by answering the question from hell, you can have that book then signed by Naomi Klein at the Drake Hotel. Again, all you have to do is just go to the website for the Chicago Council on Global Affairs and get your tickets there. Okay, I got that taken care of. Anything else I wanted to... Was there another event that we're supposed to be plugging? Yes, I think there is, but we'll get to that in a little bit. Because I think right now we might have Elvis DeMuro on the line. Oh, Elvis. What I love about that piece of music by Blackstool is the fact that Elvis is not changing his voice in any way, that he can actually make his voice disturbingly sound like that. But what's more disturbing than that to me? Good morning, Elvis.
Be afraid. Be very afraid.
So listen, I'm a banker and I'm thinking about killing myself.
Don't do it, Chuck. Don't. There is another day.
So can you tell me, all right, tell people what's going on. Pam Martins wrote about this. Unfortunately, Pam won't come on the show. She doesn't like to do radio whatsoever. There's a woman by the name of Pam Martens, Martens. She writes with her husband, Russ, sometimes. But it's usually her work. And she is the only person who I have seen writing about this, or at the beginning of this whole weird scandal thing of bankers dying. She was the only person I saw writing about this. And you were the first person who actually told me about it before I read any of Pam's work. How did you stumble on this story? Tell people what the story is and how you stumbled on it.
Well, first of all, Pam Martins is not familiar to me immediately. I may have read her stuff. Do you want to summarize that, or have you already done that?
No, that's okay. It was an article I sent to you, but it's just basically the same story that you're going to get to.
Yeah. So this is an early 2014 thing that became kind of an internet conspiracy meme because there was a rash of banker, quote-unquote, suicides. I'll give a quick list. There are various lists. The always helpful Zero Hedge has a list from July. Again, this was basically focused on early this calendar year. But they give a list of 15. Some examples, you get William Brokesmith, 58 years old, former senior executive at Deutsche Bank, found dead in his home after an apparent suicide in January. Gabriel McGee, 39, at J.P. Morgan, falling from the roof of the J.P. Morgan European headquarters in London in January.
That's a tricky roof.
Yeah, well, that's actually mentioned specifically. His family questioned how he got on that roof. That's not a roof that's easily accessed, I think. Again, 39. Mike Duiker, 50-year-old chief economist of a U.S. investment bank, found dead close to the Tacoma, I shouldn't laugh, to the Tacoma Narrows Bridge in Washington State. Richard Talley, 57-year-old founder of American Title Services, found dead earlier this month, this would be July, after apparently shooting himself with a nail gun. Common method. Tim Dickinson, UK-based communications director at Swiss, also died earlier this year, circumstances still unknown, et cetera, et cetera. There are a couple young people. Again, Zero Hedge lists 15. There are sites that list up to 48 suspicious banking deaths. Those are probably less sound. But the bottom line is, at the beginning of this calendar year, there was a rash of alleged suicides that focused on several corporations, and specifically Deutsche Bank and J.P. Morgan were heavily represented. Now, perhaps, as Bloomberg News reported, the bankers' deaths shine light on stress in the industry and tunnel vision. This was in March from Bloomberg. Coroners in London are preparing to investigate 2 apparent suicides, and this was the big one. This was Broke Smith from Deutsche Bank and Gabriel McGee from JP Morgan. This is in January. And then they were followed by others around the world, including at JP Morgan in Hong Kong, and then the Seattle guy I mentioned at Russell Investment Management Co. And Bloomberg wonders, are they under too much stress? The finest minds of our generation, these young people. But if you look at the list, there are some young people. There's a lot of older people. A lot of 47, 50, 57, 49, 52. There's also something that I didn't see earlier this year, a journalist who went missing. Are you aware of this?
No, I am not.
Yeah, this is not tinfoil stuff. We got Broke Smith from Deutsche Bank in January, and Gabriel McGee from JP Morgan within 2 days, suiciding, allegedly. Then we have a Washington Post reporter, David Bird, an oil markets reporter who'd worked, Wall Street Journal, pardon me, not Post, worked for the Journal for 20 years, vanished without a trace in January. And I looked it up to try to get an update. Still missing. He went for a normal afternoon walk. He was kind of an outdoors guy in New Jersey. Went for his normal walk, took nothing strange. Totally missing since January. And again, his job for 20 years at the Journal was researching commodities markets and oil, which is under investigation by the U.S. Senate's Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations for possible manipulation. The FBI is also involved in the journalist missing investigation. So perhaps it is the stress of these banking positions. Perhaps it's something else. In March, the Wall Street Journal reported that the Deutsche Bank executive who committed suicide was reportedly anxious amid Deutsche Bank probes. A former senior executive at Deutsche Bank committed suicide earlier this year after complaining that he was anxious about government investigations into the bank. And this is actually the big LIBOR scandal that people are probably aware of that goes back, at least into last year.
Wow.
Okay. Well, maybe he was just stressed. Let's see, more recently, in October, a senior currency trader at JP Morgan in London has left the bank after he was placed on paid leave last year amid regulatory inquiries into potential manipulation of the foreign exchange market by currency traders. Richard Usher, the former Morgan head of spot trading in London, is listed as inactive on the roster and has resigned. Fortunately, still alive as of October 14th. Again, I shouldn't laugh. But maybe he was just stressed. So what else has happened in the last few months? I think the Attorney General resigned, right?
Right.
Yeah. So he has announced the resignation, but before he is resigning, he has announced that he is actually taking a very close look into this currency manipulation, focusing specifically on Deutsche Bank, JP Morgan, as well as Citigroup and Barclays. And this, again, is recent news. This is the New York Times earlier this month. The Justice Department is preparing a fresh round of attacks on the world's biggest banks, again, questioning Wall Street's role in a broad array of financial markets. And they make it very clear that they're focusing on the banks that were hit by this rash of stressful suicides earlier this year. Something else I saw was that after Eric Holder announced that he would step down, the Attorney General, just recently, a couple days ago, Eric Holder's top deputy resigned amid revelation Fast and Furious guns used in Phoenix crime. So the Fast and Furious false flag, basically, again, used conveniently after at least a year or 2 years, I think, where they were basically the federal government was allowing people to illegally buy guns in Phoenix that ended up in hands, mostly Mexican drug cartels, but, various hands. And now they're saying that in addition to Attorney General Eric Holder, his top deputy is now resigning due to that scandal because one of those weapons was used in a murder in Phoenix. Perhaps they're just stressed. But it sounds like there may be some interesting news later this year before Eric Holder is actually out, or perhaps after the midterm elections, that corporations like Deutsche Bank and J.P. Morgan may be hit with hefty fines about currency manipulation that has been in the news, corporate news, conspiracy news for quite a while. And if you look at the list of deaths earlier this year, it's very simple. They're tied to the primary suspects in this massive financial crime. I'm not predicting that the federal government will really bust them hard, but I would predict that there will be some compensation demanded at some point. And in fact, the latest news that I read stated that one unnamed bank is basically ready to settle, which usually means a slap on the wrist, and I would presume that's Deutsche Bank. And again, if you want more details on the exact individuals that allegedly suicided or disappeared or died under mysterious circumstances, they're easy to find. I can outline them, but I think if you want my read on it, that's about it.
So this is the thing that I don't really – I mean, everything that what you were saying was making sense. I understood your suspicions. Except the one thing I don't get is why would a banker want to kill themselves? And they saw what just happened with the financial crisis of 2008 and the prosecutions following that most people don't. Most people aren't held responsible. Very few people go to jail, and the ones who do, and the banks that do settle, like you were just saying, Deutsche Bank might settle. As soon as that settlement happens, there's no admission to responsibility. There's no sense of guilt. That's a way that they can get off of the responsibility, just pay out a small token amount of money and move on. So why would somebody want to kill themselves when they know in that culture and in that environment that they're probably not going to be held responsible anyway?
That is the correct question to ask, and that raises the question, I think, or begs the question how big is this? Because I agree with everything you said. Everything you said is accurate, and again, I have the same question. So it makes it even stranger that this would happen. And again, these are, the story was almost massaged to young, stressed young analyst at a hedge fund, 27, jumps off the roof.
Right.
No, these are senior, high-level executives at with full careers, late 40s, 50s. This is not that. It's not stress at the job that's making young people opt out. And so I agree. Everything you said is accurate, and I think it just begs the question of how big is this? And why is there, I don't know if a fear, but a feeling or an idea that the federal government will finally, whether it's a token response or not, and whether it's Eric Holder going out the door or not, and whether it's Mr. Barry going out the door or not after the election, will there be something more than a wrist slap in the coming months?
Is there a connection between this, and I think that this is either the last report you gave us or 2 reports ago, there was the murder by the maid of a huge banking executive's kids. Wasn't that it?
Yeah, that one was horrific and very fishy. And I would say, and you're correct, that's a good point to bring up, that predated this. That was like 2013 at some point. That predated the rash of supposed suicide. I would, come on, who you're asking. I would presume they're connected. Let me put it that way.
That's why you run the Conspiracy Corner and why it's spelled with K's. Hey, is there anything else you wanted to add? Because there's a couple of stories I wanted to share with you.
Yeah, I got a laundry list.
Oh, go ahead.
But I did want to put in here, and I emailed this a few months ago. ISIS, ISIL, Islamic State, etc. Their supposed mastermind, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, probably butchering the name to some degree, the most dangerous militant group in the world, so he must be the most dangerous man in the world. Well, he was held for several years during the Iraq occupation by the U.S. at Camp Bucca in Iraq. He was then released inexplicably. He was held for years, most wanted man, and then inexplicably released. He has been reported to be, quote, captured multiple times and may actually be several different people who have been arrested or killed about half a dozen times, like a wraith who keeps reappearing. That would be the Telegraph in London that I'm quoting.
Wow.
So this is now our big bad guy. And without backing it, I wanted to note that on the air. And without backing it up, I will just say U.S. arms Al-Qaeda, U.S. fights Al-Qaeda.
Yeah.
U.S. and Israel arm Hamas, U.S. and Israel fight Hamas. U.S. arms ISIS, U.S. fights ISIS.
Yeah, did you see the whole thing with the Khorasan group, the new, more evil than the Iraqi state, ISIS, than ISIL, than the Iraqi state, whatever you want to call it, Islamic State? They were saying that President Obama came out and said the Khorasan group is even worse, blah, 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 blah. Everybody ran with the story. What's her name? Barbara Starr, the Pentagon spokesperson who works over at CNN, she ran with it. Richard Engel over at NBC ran with it. CBS, ABC ran with it. Within 48 hours, Richard Engel is posting on Twitter, and of course they don't go back and make a correction from their original news broadcast. He said, people here in Syria have never heard of the leader of Khorasan, and they've never heard of the word Khorasan before.
I love it. That's got to be the new model, the anti-retraction on Twitter.
Exactly.
The Times has to get behind that. I was interested in the name ISIS immediately.
Oh, sure. Shazam, man. Shazam.
Rang a bell, you know. So, you know, in Egyptology, Isis is the mother of Horus, the god of war.
You've seen the live action show from the 70s, right? ISIS?
No, I have not.
Saturday morning show.
Shazam, I know from comics.
Right. There's a Saturday morning show called Captain Marvel, and
Yep.
Captain Marvel would either show ISIS or they would show Shazam, and it would alternate from week to week. Go back and watch those ISIS episodes on YouTube. They are hilarious.
I guarantee there's some prophecy there as well.
Yes.
Let me just note, Isis, the mother of Horus.
Right.
If you look into the myth of how Horus was born, it's quite interesting. Involves castration and a golden phallus.
Oh, so much like the way that the United States created ISIS. Go ahead.
Exactly, yes, exactly. Wands,
Right.
rituals. And you might recognize both the Eye of Horus. You also might recognize some of the symbols of Horus that could ring a bell from both the Third Reich and the sigil at the United States White House. Hawk-headed thing.
Oh, this is why I love Elvis's segment. I absolutely love the conspiracy corner. Anything else?
What do you have?
All right, here's one thing I wanted to mention real quick, because I had posted this last night on my own Facebook page, and it got tons of shares and tons of likes already. As CNN reported yesterday, the Navy Reserve discharged Vice President Joe Biden's son, R. Hunter Biden, this year after he tested positive for cocaine, U.S. officials confirmed. The discharge of Biden, a 44-year-old lawyer and managing partner at an investment firm, was first reported by the Wall Street Journal on Thursday. He confirmed the report in a statement on CNN. Now, at This Is How, we usually don't care about this kind of news, and to be honest, this really isn't all that newsworthy, being that plenty of powerful politicians have had kids with drug problems, but there is part of the story that nobody mentioned when reporting it yesterday. That is the job that our Hunter Biden recently got because of the fall of the Yanukovych government in Ukraine. As Zero Hedge reported back in May, Burisma Holdings, Ukraine's largest private gas producer, has expanded its board of directors by bringing in Mr. R. Hunter Biden as a new director. R. Hunter Biden will be in charge of the holdings legal unit and will provide support for the company among international organizations. So the part the networks left out of is that Joe Biden's son, when he wasn't doing coke in Ukraine, he was fracking the hell out of it for the West. It makes you wonder, how awesome is watching the world being fracked while you're high on crack?
Well, let's not say it. Let's not presume it's crack.
Well, why not?
Probably,
White people do crack all the time. It's an assumption I usually make.
It was probably supremely high quality flake, but that's a scoop to me, and I think that's an excellent point. And you're just right. I mean, that's what they left out. And I will add that, as most people may know, there is a Gary Webb Hollywood documentary coming out.
This was the next thing I was going to talk about, but go ahead, my friend.
I hate to cite the Huffington Post. I hate to click on a Google search link that brings me to the Huffington Post. But the Huffington Post on October 10th has an excellent article entitled "Key Figures in CIA Crack Cocaine Scandal Begin to Come Forward." You may have mentioned this on the air, but the bottom line is it's not, shockingly, not a great piece of journalism. But they enlightened me to someone doing a new documentary on the real Freeway Ricky Ross and Gary Webb and a lot of key players, and strategically releasing it with this Hollywood movie.
Oh, awesome.
And so I highly recommend that people find, one way or another, a new documentary named Freeway: Crack in the System.
Freeway Crack in the System?
Yeah, no pun intended, crack in the system. And it's Freeway Rick Ross, the real Rick Ross. And from what I can glean from this terrible journalism from the HuffPost, it sounds heavy duty. I mean, it sounds like they got people that Gary Webb cited heavily in his amazing book, Dark Alliance, and they are for the first time going on the record. And they're actually saying in this documentary, the documentarians have found people that no one could find, sources, Gary Webb's sources. And they're like, oh, you found me. No one could find me, in Colombia, Nicaragua. You found me, and they're going on the record. And I really hope it's an excellent documentary, because I think this is great that they're going to leverage the Hollywood budget, which I got to believe is going to be half BS. They're going to leverage that promotion machine to perhaps and ideally put out something proper that really pays tribute to what Gary Webb did and his life's work, which is indisputably one of the best things that any journalist has ever done.
Has ever done in the history of especially American journalism. Yeah. And there's a review right now at consortiumnews.com, Bob Perry's website, Robert Perry's website. There's a review of it. It's a glowing review. He just, it's not, Bob isn't writing it, it's somebody else, saying that the movie is fantastic. The things that I've read about the new Gary Webb movie, Kill the Messenger, the fictionalized one with Jeremy Renner, is that it is a little bit muddled, which is a concern for me, because the reviewer that I read who gave it 3 stars said it's muddled much like some of the reporting of Gary Webb's, which isn't the case. Well, exactly. So I can see that problem already arising. But yeah, I'm really interested. I can't wait to go see this movie. I'm really excited about seeing it. So Consortium News has an article about it, has a review of it, and that was the other thing I was going to say. Bob Perry told me long time ago that during Iran-Contra, during the hearings, the only people who would go up to the judge's desk and pick up the papers of the evidence that was going to be discussed that day, the only people who would be picking up that evidence would be Gary Webb and Bob Perry when Bob was writing over at Newsweek. All of of the other people from the Washington Post, LA Times, New York Times, didn't matter whatever place, AP, Reuters, nobody else was ever going up and looking at that evidence. Only people like Bob Perry and Gary Webb, because they're the actual real journalists. You know, when somebody says that I'm a journalist, that's BS. People who are journalists are people like Greg Palast, who actually do investigating, Michael Hudson, who actually do investigating, Gary Webb. You know, that's a real journalist. And
it's worth stating and it's worth restating.
Yeah.
I'm glad you said that and gave credit to Bob Perry, who's fortunately still alive, unlike Gary Webb.
Yeah.
And, you know, I'm going to have to see the Hollywood thing, but this documentary sounds great, so I'm going to check it out, and I recommend everyone else does.
All right, let me repeat it one more time.
It looks like an online thing, but I haven't looked at it yet.
Freeway crack in the system. All right, Elvis, let's leave it there. We went over a little bit because I wanted to talk to you about some stuff. So I'll talk to you soon, man. When are you coming back to Chicago?
Never.
All right, good to hear.
11.
This is Hell. Every Saturday morning at 9 a.m. we're going till 1 p.m. So if you go to SoundCloud, you can find an interview I did with the late, great Gary Webb back in 1998. Gary was the reporter Jeremy Renner plays in Kill the Messenger. Gary revealed that the Contras in Nicaragua were being funded through cocaine sales assisted by the CIA, cocaine sales that would later spur the crack epidemic of the 1990s. One of the crazy things that happens in Kill the Messenger, which Gary talked about in his book, is the problem wasn't that there was such high demand of cocaine in the United States. The problem was there was such a high amount of supply. The problem wasn't demand. The problem was supply. There's no way Hollywood can tell Gary's story as powerful and depressing as Gary did in his own words on This Is Hell 16 years ago, back in 1998. One of the very first big-name people was willing to come on our show. There is now plenty of evidence to back up Gary's investigation, and in a New York Times review of the movie, as Robert Perry pointed out at consortiumnews.com, the reviewer says that Webb was later proven correct. And as Elvis was just saying, there's going to be a new documentary out called Freeway Crack in the System that's going to have many of the witnesses and a lot of the people who gave Gary the information that he had in reporting the story. But the real enemy in the movie isn't President Reagan, though President Reagan was the person who was in charge of the country when the CIA was dealing coke to raise money for the Contras, which apparently is being proven true. The real enemy isn't Reagan, or the Contras, or the drug dealers, or the CIA. The real villain is that our guardians of democracy and the most hallowed of our journalistic institutions, the Washington Post, the New York Times, and the LA Times, they all did everything they could to kill the story, ruin Gary's reputation, all to stay cozy with the CIA. And it also killed Gary Webb. Access was deemed more important than truth by the Times, and the Post. They all do some great work, and we shouldn't dismiss every one of those media outlets, but we should not kid ourselves, and we should all realize that while we do not have a state-run press, while we have a market system that supposedly guides all our business decisions, the highest echelons and the most respected journalistic outlets at times choose to work as propaganda tools for the government. Now, you got to ask yourself what's worse, a media outlet that is forced to be a propaganda tool of the government, or the New York Times, LA Times, and Washington Post, which choose to be propaganda tools of the government, all in the name of access. So go to SoundCloud. We have a direct link to it at our Facebook page, somewhere on there on the This Is Hell page, somewhere on the Chuck Mertz Facebook page, or you can just put in Gary Webb at SoundCloud and This Is Hell, and I'm sure it pops up over there. So make sure you go hear that interview from 16 years ago with Gary Webb, the guy who is the feature character, this nonfiction feature character that is played by Jeremy Renner in the new movie Kill the Messenger. Go back and listen to our 38-minute interview, I believe it is, with Gary Webb. It really is fantastic. Now that abortion is no longer an election issue, let's find out why it should be. Katha Pollitt is author of the new book, Pro, Reclaiming Abortion Rights. Good morning, Katha.
Morning.
Katha's Subject to Debate column, which debuted in 1995 and which the Washington Post called the best place to go for original thinking on the left, appears every other week in The Nation. In 2003, Subject to Debate won the National Magazine Award for columns and commentary. I was going to send you, I don't like to do pre-interviews whatsoever because we have 35 minutes and I want to have a conversational style to our interview. And I was going to send you a link to this ad, but instead let me just describe it to you. On page 5 of Tuesday's Chicago Tribune, Tribune. There was a full-page paid political advertisement that looked like a press release with the all-capitalized and emboldened words "Personal Choice for Illinois," followed by a subtitle underneath that was not bold or capitalized that read, "An open letter from supporters for reproductive rights." There's then a silhouette of Illinois with stars, so it looks all official. The ad reads, "We write as long-time supporters of reproductive rights to celebrate the fact that in this election," then in all bold, "both candidates for Illinois governor are pro-choice." That's then followed by a pro-choice comment from the Republican candidate. The statement then reads, "The only difference between the candidates on reproductive rights is the issue of parental notification." And finally, a couple of paragraphs later, they celebrate both candidates being pro-choice. Some more, the last line, again, all in bold, is this: "Voters will be free to select their candidate based on the many other issues facing our state." The ad is then signed by a whole bunch of mostly Republican women, including the Republican candidate's wife. Are you equally pro-choice if one supports parental notification for minors seeking to end a pregnancy and one doesn't?
No. No, you're not. One is more pro-choice than the other. It's great, if true, that that's the only difference. And it shows you that the Republicans are kind of afraid they might have overshot their mark a little bit with abortion, with their opposition to reproductive rights, and kind of dial it back a little bit. But I think that parental notification is really a bad idea. A lot of pro-choicers do favor it, but I think that's because on the surface it sounds, sure, shouldn't a parent know, right? But then you think, I just heard about a case like this the other day, where there's two parents, where you have to notify both parents. In a lot of cases, one parent is completely out of the picture, and you have some 16-year-old girl who has to write to some father she hasn't seen in 10 years, and ask for, tell him that she's having an abortion. I just think it's a real invasion of privacy.
The other difference between the two candidates here in Illinois is that one candidate supports abortion rights when it comes to late-term abortions, and the other one doesn't. Again, the Republican Party says, that's just a small difference. We're both pro-choice. It's just that one guy is for parental notification and one guy is against late-term abortions. How successful have Republicans been in making choice a non-issue at election time, seeing as how it looks like immigration, it's a losing issue?
Well, the Republicans have been tremendously successful, and in hemming in and curtailing the right to abortion, and also let's not forget the right of employees to get no copay birth control under the Affordable Care Act. That's a huge issue too. And I think there's just no question that the Republican Party as a whole, and when you vote for a Republican, you are helping the whole party, not just an individual, wants to make abortion as hard to get as possible.
Before we get to your book and your mom's story about her abortion, as soon as I started reading your book, I thought of my grandmother working a women's center in Detroit in like the 1920s and helping women get help if they needed it, no matter how illegal and how secretive they had to be. And then I started thinking about the I Had an Abortion campaign. There was the film by past guest Jennifer Baumgardner, the T-shirts women who had abortions would presumably wear as a political statement. In your opinion, while that may be a great way to tell the stories of why women made the choice they did, how important is, and I'm not even too sure what words to use here, how important is that kind of empowerment, if you will, or coming out of the closet, or maybe it's a sort of identity politics? How important is that kind of confessional to those who want choice and want choice protected?
Well, I wouldn't call it confessional. And there's another word you used in there that I wouldn't use.
I know. I know. I was struggling for the word. I was trying to find out what it is.
I would say I would compare it to coming out for gays and lesbians. The issues aren't quite the same, but they're related. I think a problem, and I would say, if you can tell your story safely to people that you trust, that's a really great thing. A lot of women haven't told anybody, and that allows the gap in the information gap to be filled by stereotypes like who has abortions? Oh, slutty teenagers, welfare queens, people too lazy to use birth control, child-hating, cold-hearted career women. And that means that people think of abortion as something very distant from themselves and from people they know and from normal life, but that's not true. They probably do know someone who has had an abortion, probably more than one person, when you consider that 1 in 3 American women will have had an abortion by menopause, and some will have had more than one. And also, the most important, I think, little fact that people talking about their abortions would bring forward is that 61% of women who have abortions are mothers. So the picture that abortion is what women do when they just hate children is completely false. Abortion is what women do in order to have a life that is livable, that is good for their whole family, that is good for them. Sometimes it involves helping their other children. And the idea that women should just have random children because they got pregnant is really not a way to make for a good society or for a happy life for women or men or children.
You even used the word in your book, the infantilization of women, which I can completely see within this way in which they're not given rights to their own body. As for you not knowing your mother had an abortion, you found out after she had passed away. You write, for a while I was angry at her. I thought she owed me this bit of woman-to-woman realism and honesty instead of, or at least in addition to, tales of the 9 marriage proposals she had received by the time she met my father, falling in love with him at first sight, eloping with him 3 months later, when she had just turned 21. Knowing about her abortion might have helped me. It might have given me a truer sense of life as a young, very romantic woman who had no idea what was that.
No, what was what?
What was what? Sorry.
Yeah, what was what?
So you wanted realism and honesty rather than all the romance. How much of overcoming sexism and how much of protecting reproductive rights is about women, especially women as mothers, honestly discussing reality with other women and their daughters, de-romanticizing, if you will, demystifying what adult life is like for women?
Oh, I think it's just crucial. If you look at popular culture, there are these 2 stereotypes. One is women are hoes and bitches, and that's a great message to put out there. And the other is this kind of sappy rom-com romanticism where, in 2 of the most successful movies involving unplanned pregnancy, Juno and Knocked Up, it all works out great. You give your child up for adoption, that's great. You cry a little bit, but then everything's fine. You're back with your boyfriend, back in high school. And in Knocked Up, she ends up marrying this completely inappropriate person with whom she had a one-night stand. Now, how realistic is that?
Not very. I'm just glad I was really high while watching Knocked Up because that movie would have annoyed me more. You write, I never had an abortion, but my mother did. She didn't tell me about it, but from what I pieced together after her death from a line in her FBI file, which my father, the old radical, had requested along with his own, it was in 1960, so like almost all abortions back then, it was illegal. So your mom had an FBI file. How much of a political activity do you think having an abortion was in the past? Do you think that the more radical you were politically, the more likely you were to seek out an abortion? Or do you think that when there were more restrictions, the reasons women chose to have an abortion were the same reasons women choose today?
We don't know exactly. I wouldn't say politics had anything to do with it. I think women who had abortions came from every walk of life, every social strata, and all over the country. But there's a lot of we don't know exactly how many women had abortions when it was illegal, but toward the end of the 1950s, Mary Steichen Calderon, who was the medical director of Planned Parenthood, asked a whole bunch of demographers and people in related social science fields to try to figure it out. And it's interesting, the most common number that came up was around 1 million a year. Now, when you consider, that's like now, it's only a little more now. So when you consider that this is a much smaller population back in the 50s, and this is the 50s, it's before feminism, right? It's before really the sexual revolution had gotten going. So the way we associate abortion now with, especially people who disapprove of it, with sexual license and women just getting out of hand, this really isn't true. Abortion is what women do when they can't have another child and don't want another child and are not in a circumstance to take care of that child well, and that has nothing to do really with how much sex they have.
You write, what did it mean that my mother had to break the law? God, I got to get that shadow off of my script here. You write, what did it mean that my mother had to break the law to end a pregnancy? It meant that America basically said to her, it's the 20th century, so we're going to let you vote and go to college and have a family and a job. Not a great job, not the one you wanted, because unfortunately that job is for men. And your own charge accounts at Bonwitz and Altman's and your own subscription to the Heritage Book Club. But underneath all that normal, forward-looking, mid-20th century, middle-class New York life is the secret underground life of women, and that you must manage outside the law. If you are injured or die or are trapped by the police, you'll only have yourself to blame, because the real reason you are here on Earth is to produce children, and you shirk that duty at your peril. We were speaking with Kevin Alexander Gray earlier, and he writes about how the George Zimmerman trial decision reverberated through black youth culture who suddenly felt officially criminalized for no other reason than how they looked. While maybe not to that degree, while possibly in a different way even, when it comes to women's reproductive rights, is there an undercurrent even to this day that women are criminalized, or is that going too far?
I think women are stigmatized, and there have been, cases where women have been criminalized. For example, now that abortion is so much harder to get in many states, and you have to travel a long distance, you have to stay overnight or maybe for 2 days, or even in Missouri 3, because there's a waiting period. It ratchets up the cost, and women are and places it out of reach of some women, and so women are resorting to pills they buy over the internet or bring back from Mexico. And there's a woman in jail, a prison now, in Pennsylvania, because she, at her teenage daughter's request, bought an abortion pill over the internet and gave it to her daughter. And that was because the clinic was 75 miles away, and Pennsylvania is putting in a lot of restrictions. And then you think, oh, well, I can buy this pill over the. She didn't even know it was illegal, but it is illegal. Self-abortion is illegal in many states, and those women are being put on trial.
Let's say I am someone who is, I don't know, for religious reasons or for whatever this person would call morality or ethical reasons, against abortion, but believes in women having every other right equal to men. Access to employment, health care, equal pay, every other right but reproductive rights. How unequal would women's lives be if all other rights were granted to women but reproductive rights?
Well, it's not enough to have a right. You have to be able to exercise it. And if a woman is in the position where she has to either have an illegal abortion, which is probably not the safest thing to do, and could enter in a lot of trouble with the police, or have a baby she's not able or willing to take care of because she has other important things to do, you're going to see women not being able to finish school. They're not going to be able to stay at work or advance at work. They'll have to marry men that they don't want to marry. They'll have to be tied to abusive men for the life of that child. I really don't see how they can be equal. It's like saying you're equal, except for you have this burden that no man has. So how equal is that going to be?
We are speaking with Katha Powlett. She is author of the new book, Pro: Reclaiming Abortion Rights. You write, you would almost think the people who have always opposed women's independence and full participation in society were still at it. They can't push women all the way back, but they can use women's bodies to keep them under surveillance and control. Why do you feel this isn't about abortion, that the only issue isn't the idea that thou shalt not kill? Why do you think this is about a larger attack on women's rights rather than a dispute over one issue when it comes to women's rights?
Oh, because you can see that in the way people who oppose abortions will make exceptions. Not all of them, of course. There is a percentage of Americans who say abortion should be completely banned, even if it means the death of the woman, even if it's rape, even if the baby's going to die within minutes of birth or die in the womb or whatever. Abortion should be illegal. There are those people. But most people who are oppose abortion and want to restrict it will make exceptions. For example, if you're raped, they think you should be able to have an abortion. If you had voluntary sex, you shouldn't be able to have an abortion. Well, right there, that tells you this is about the woman's behavior. It's not about whether the fetus is a person or the embryo or the fertilized egg is a person. It's about how the woman got pregnant. And if you disapprove of how she got pregnant, then she has to have a baby because, of course, having a baby is a suitable punishment for having sex. But if she's raped, all bets are off and she can have her abortion. Well, explain that, except as wanting to punish women for behavior that you disapprove of.
There's nothing like making a child punishment. That's a great punishment. You have to raise this child. That sounds fantastic. And I want to ask you about that in a little bit. How much has today's technology, have advances in women's reproductive health care, how much has that undermined the pro-choice cause, and that women now have at least a greater accessibility to better birth control of all sorts than in the past? Do advances in health care undermine the pro-choice campaign? Are young women today thinking, I don't need to get involved in any pro-choice movement because I can get the birth control I need in my community?
Well, I think there probably are plenty of people who, because abortion is so stigmatized, think, I'm leading a righteous life and I use birth control and I don't do all kinds of nutty, crazy things, and so I will not get pregnant. And so those women who do get pregnant have failed to, do the right thing. But, every birth control method has a failure rate. A lot of women who have abortions have been using birth control. It's not easy over the course of a reproductive life, which is from about 30 years, say from the time you're 15 to you're 45. It's not so easy to do it all perfectly for that long. So you have a lot of women who are as good at using birth control as, people are at any form of technology or any form of medication, and they do get pregnant. But yeah, birth control it's better to use it than not to use it. I think that there is some complacency out there. And also, another thing that's I think important is that the most restrictive states up until quite recently have tended to be rural states with small populations that are far from media markets, like the Dakotas. So it's easy for someone who lives in, New York or Connecticut or Virginia to think, well, this has nothing to do with me. But as the mention of Virginia shows, it's getting harder and harder to say that. People, I think, are waking up because those restrictions are spreading out throughout the states. And now you find plenty of purple states, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Virginia, that are Michigan has had a lot of restrictions, which you wouldn't think, right? Because it's a big country with a big state with big cities, and
right.
It's industrial. It's not the Deep South, but a lot of states now they're losing clinics. Texas is the most famous example, of course. They're losing clinics. They're losing providers. They're losing the ability of women to be able to actually get to the clinics and jump through all those hoops. So it's my hope that people will wake up and think, you know, it may start in North Dakota and it may start with some woman you think is a slut, but sooner or later it's going to affect you.
We were talking about the punishment of making a woman raise a child, which is a disturbing thought. You write women's lives are different now, so much so we're in danger of forgetting how they used to be. Legalizing abortion didn't just save women from death and injury and fear of arrest. It didn't just make it possible for women to commit to education and work and free them from shotgun marriages and too many kids. It changed how women saw themselves as mothers by choice, not fate. As long as abortion is available to her, even a woman who thinks it is tantamount to murder is making a choice when she keeps a pregnancy. She may feel like she has to have that baby, Jesus or her parents or her boyfriend is telling her she has to do it, but actually she doesn't have to do it. She is choosing to have that baby. This made me think that today, if you are a woman and you have a kid, then there's a greater likelihood that you actually wanted your kid. So do you think this all means that today, with reproductive choice, women who decide to have babies are more likely to want those kids than women who were forced to have kids in the past? Are kids today less likely to be unwanted than they were in the past?
Yes, I think that that's a very good point. I think that, you know, back in the old days, you know, women had enormous numbers of children, and they couldn't take care of them. A lot of, you know, they didn't have enough money. They were stressed out. They were very, They were struggling along, and it's hard to be a wonderful parent to, to your 12th child or your 8th child that you didn't want to have. I mean, women have always had dreams. Women always wanted to have a good, happy life with some pleasure in it and some freedom, and they are much more able to do that now than before. And, you know, it's good for men, too. I mean, it was no fun for men to have a whole bunch of children they couldn't support.
Yeah, it makes me think of my brother-in-law's family. He has, there's a total of 17 kids in that family. His mom had a kid every year for 11 straight years, and they were really big members of the Catholic community in our neighborhood. And yeah, I know those people, and while they love their kids, I know that they weren't too happy about the position that they were put in. You write, trust women is a popular motto in the pro-choice movement. It sounds a little sentimental, doesn't it? Part of the old sisterhood is powerful feminism. It is fashionable to mock today. According to an April 2013 Huffington Post YouGov poll, only 20% of Americans, including 23% of women and 16% of men, consider themselves feminists. Another 8% consider themselves anti-feminists, while 63% said they are neither. However, the same people were asked if they believe that men and women should be social, political, and economic equals. 82% of the survey respondents said they did, and just 9% said they did not. Equal percentages of men and women said they agreed with that statement. In other words, the definition of feminism they believe in, the word feminism they don't. Is there simply a branding problem with feminism? And what explains that, and who do you blame?
Well, it's easy to say that you believe in equality. It's harder to say, I believe in the things that we need to do to get there, which might include, say, political activism. It might include affirmative action. It might include legal abortion being readily available. I think, feminism is a word with connotations that imply political struggle, and that's a little different than saying, oh, yeah, I want everyone to have all the good things in life. But it's my own belief that the reason the word feminism puts people off is that it says that it puts off other people. People don't want to use that word because they think, oh, now men won't like me. Now I'm saying I don't wear makeup or I don't shave my legs. That it's sort of that I'm not feminine. And I think that that's a very something that women are very leery of saying. It's a political, it's a social demerit to say you're a feminist. People are going to tease you and say mean things to you, so people don't say it. It's like saying you're an atheist, you know? I think there are a lot more people who are extremely suspicious of, you know, who suspect strongly that there is no deity, but they're not going to call themselves an atheist because that's a very stigmatized identity.
Yeah, and instead of saying they're an atheist, what they'll say is, "I'm not religious, I'm spiritual."
Oh yeah. I never know what that means.
I don't know what that means either. I think it means I'm afraid to say that I'm an atheist. The first time we had Vince Bugliosi on our show way back in 1999, we asked him if there was a law that did something he supported but was a poorly written law and could easily be overturned or undermined. Vince immediately said Roe v. Wade. How bad is the law in Roe v. Wade when it comes to protecting a woman's reproductive rights?
Well, I think I actually don't think that judgment was so bad. I think it was based on a line of decisions about privacy that goes back a long way.
I think Vince was saying that it was a poorly written law, and so it would have vulnerabilities that it didn't need to have.
Well, I think that like other Supreme Court decisions, it gets modified going down the road of history according to politics and social organization. For example, you know, we had a decision in this country that outlawed school segregation, but because school segregation is actually pretty popular among white people, the schools are now as segregated as they were back in 1954. So Roe v. Wade was, I think, not a bad decision, but it has been hemmed around by, it's been chipped away at so much that now it's sort of in some states, if you have only one clinic in your state, right, as in 6 or 7 states now, basically you have very little access to abortion, you know? Which was one of the problems that Roe v. Wade was supposed to remedy.
Right.
So, I mean, I would have loved it if instead of focusing just on privacy and on the rights of doctors, because if you read Roe v. Wade, Justice Blackmun talks a lot about doctors' rights to care for their patients as they saw best. I would think it would have been great if he had said this is essential for women's equality. But the same people who don't like abortion for privacy reasons wouldn't like it for equality reasons either.
Right. The clinching argument, I think, for those who are against a woman's reproductive rights is that it violates their religious beliefs. Have religious scholars come up with doubt about whether specific religions, actually do oppose a woman's right to choose? Is that being debated, or once someone says, look, my religion explicitly says that I cannot support abortion, is the discussion over?
Well, it might be over for them, but, you know, we don't live in a theocracy, so the fact that their interpretation of their scripture says no abortion really shouldn't determine what happens in the law. But, and I discuss this in my book at some length, and so it might interest readers out there, that the Bible actually doesn't ban abortion. There is no mention of abortion in the Bible, not one word. And there are only the fleetingest of mentions of situations that could be likened somehow to abortion. For example, what happens if there's a miscarriage caused by an attack on a woman, which occurs in the Old Testament at some point. And what the Bible says is the life of the woman and the life of the fetus are not equally valuable. And, you know, in Judaism, and let's remember, Jews wrote the Old Testament, so the rabbis should know what it says. The fetus is not a person until it is born and draws a breath. There are circumstances under which abortion is mandatory in Judaism, for example, to save the woman's life. because her life is more valuable than the life of the unborn. And that's the way it is in Judaism. So if you're going to start talking about religion, you do have to ask, well, which religion? And whose interpretation of that religion? In the 1960s, and this is, I think, really fascinating, in the 1960s, when they were beginning to discuss the need to liberalize the very, very strict bans on abortion that existed in most states, a number of denominations came out and said, yes, we need to do this. We need to have more liberal abortion laws. And one of those denominations was the Southern Baptists. Now, you would never know that today. Now the Southern Baptists are pretty fundamentalist. They officially say women should obey their husbands, should submit to their husbands, and they're completely anti-abortion and becoming more so, as if that's possible. But back in the 60s, they read the same Bible and came up with a different answer.
That's fascinating, and that's why people should go out and get Katha's book immediately. Katha Pollitt is author of the new book, Pro, Reclaiming Abortion Rights. Katha's Subject to Debate column, which debuted in 1995 and which the Washington Post called the best place to go for original thinking on the left, appears every other week in The Nation at thenation.com. In 2003, Subject to Debate won the National Magazine Award for columns and commentary. Katha, I have one last question for you, and it is the question from hell, the question we hate to ask, you might hate to answer, or our audience will hate your response. And if you want to purchase Katha's book, you can just go to our website, thisishell.com. You click on the title, and it takes you directly to the publisher's webpage where you can purchase it directly from them. You write, Roe v. Wade gave women a kind of existential freedom that is not always welcome. Indeed, is sometimes quite painful, but that has become part of what women are. Do you think Roe v. Wade can work in a way that was unintended, that it can actually put pressure on a woman to have an abortion? Does the existence of Roe v. Wade pressure women to have an abortion?
Well, that's an interesting question because the Guttmacher Institute asked women, were you coerced when you had your abortion? And, pushed into it. And only I think it was 0.05% or 0.5% of women said, yeah, this wasn't my idea. It was the idea of my parents or my husband or my boyfriend or whatever. So I would say the answer to that, and that's significantly down from when they asked the same question, 10 and 20 years earlier. So I would say actually no. Abortion, Roe v. Wade does not take away freedom from women. It gives women freedom.
Okay, good. I'm glad that you said it's a good question because I felt really awful asking it. Often when I ask the question from hell, I feel horrible asking the question from hell, so I'm glad that you let me off the hook. Thank you very much. We've been speaking with Katha Pollitt. You got to check out her new book. I'm going to hold it up for the TV cameras in here. Oh, yeah, we're on the radio. Pro, Reclaiming Abortion Rights. The author is Katha Pollitt. You can find a direct link to the book at our Facebook page, at our website right now, thisishell.com. Thank you so much, Katha, for being on our show this morning. And again, you are yet another person who made the huge mistake of giving me your email address, and so I'll be bugging you in the very near future to come back on the show.
Thanks so much. It'll
right.
be a pleasure.
Thank you, Katha. Take care.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye. This is Hell. Every Saturday morning at 9 a.m. We're going till 1 p.m. If you heard the horrible, awful news about the 43 missing students in Mexico feared to have been kidnapped or killed by drug gangs, the news actually got worse this week. According to BBC News, Mexico's Attorney General says DNA tests have shown that 28 bodies found in a mass grave are not those of a missing group of students. Jesus Murillo Caram said further tests were being carried out on 4 other recently discovered mass grave sites. That's right, these are not the corpses you are looking for in the process of trying to find 43 students feared dead. They found 28 other dead people in a mass grave and 4 more mass graves that may not have any of the missing students' bodies either. Yep, the drug war is going great. We can't even figure out which mass grave to unearth to find potential drug war victims. Fantastic. My favorite, well, let me get this story real first. Al Jazeera. Headline in Al Jazeera today, or this week, from Tuesday. Everybody's already moved on from hashtag bring back our girls. You knew that ABC, NBC, CBS would run with it for a couple of days, but if nothing happened over a week, let's forget about it and move on. As Al Jazeera reported this week, abandonment of Bring Back Our Girls 6 months on, outrage and sorrow over the mass schoolgirl abduction has disappeared. Oh, yeah, except for those families in Nigeria. This says 6 months after the armed group Boko Haram kidnapped 276 Nigerian girls from a boarding school in the northeastern town of Chibok, 219 remain in captivity after 57 escaped on their own. That may come as a surprise to many people because the April 14 mass abduction that drew global shock, condemnation, and media attention has since been largely forgotten, except in Chibok, that is, every day at Unity Fountain in Nigeria's capital, Abuja. Family members of the girls, community members, and citizens in solidarity gather to chant the message that was heard around the world last April. Bring back our girls. None of the young women so far have been rescued. Again, they have only escaped on their own, despite a global Bring Back Our Girls Twitter campaign that went viral and garnered support from such high-profile figures as the U.S. President's wife, Michelle Obama, and Nobel Peace Prize winner Malala Yousafzai. World leaders from countries including the United States, UK, France, China, Canada, Israel offered assistance to Nigeria to free the schoolgirls, but to date, no diplomatic or military action has secured their release. Mekeki Muta, an uncle of two of the missing girls, 17-year-old Saratu and 18-year-old Elizabeth, said, "As far as our girls are concerned, they have been abandoned." There's a saying, actions speak louder than words. Leaders from around the world came out and said they would assist to bring the girls back, but now we hear nothing. The question I wish to raise is, why? If they knew they would not do anything, they wouldn't have even made that promise at all. By just coming out to tell the world, I see that as a political game, which it shouldn't be so far as the girls are concerned. So bring back our girls. They should change that hashtag to bring back our girls story. Really, just bring back the whole girls story at this point. Yes, sir?
Hey, just two more people have written in for our question from hell I just wanted to share with you.
Tell people what the question from hell is.
The question from hell we asked is, it's fall, and no amount of probably carcinogenic pumpkin spice additive can get the taste of bile out of our mouths when we walk past whatever dopey campaign yard signs are littering our neighborhood. So we're asking, what would you put on your campaign sign to piss off your neighbors? We've had a ton of responses, and we got two more recently while we were doing the show. And Bill W. says, give money to the person begging to you outside your car. Do it. Do it today. And Kate S. says, Vermont, the white whirligig mountain state. Maybe the next question, what is a whirligig?
A whirligig? It's one of those things that whirls. It's a gig that whirls. I don't know what the hell it is. I know I've heard the term a million times, but I cannot even. My favorite headline this week was definitely Sturgeon poised to take over Scottish leadership. Of course, I imagine some sort of Scottish protest vote because of the defeat of independence and a bunch of pranksters voting a fish into power, but nope. Scottish Deputy First Minister Nicola Sturgeon will take over leadership of the government from Alex Salmond after his resignation in the wake of independence's failure. Still, Sturgeon poised to take over Scottish leadership would have made a great, fantastic Onion headline. I saw this ad this week that shocked me, that stunned me. It was an ad during the news, of course. I made the huge mistake of watching the nightly news. It was an ad about a drug that fights fevers. And I can't remember what the name of the actual drug was, and I don't even want to tell you what it was because you might actually think, oh, maybe I should go get that because Chuck mentioned it on the show. So it was an ad about some drug that fights fevers. And at the end of the ad, it included these side effects: running or stuffed nose, sore throat, aches, and fever. Now, I'm no doctor, but the side effects sound exactly like the fever the drug is supposed to cure. So why would you take a fever drug that says, oh, by the way, side effects include a fever? Makes absolutely no sense to me. Sound is down, but do we have a guest waiting, or that is not the cue that I'm waiting for here?
Not right now.
All right, sweet. So I got another story, a couple stories that share with you, our listening audience, which is fantastic. This is a new study on charter schools. This is from the Institute on Metropolitan Opportunity. Came out on Monday. Institute on Metropolitan Opportunity study shows Chicago charter schools underperform their traditional counterparts. A new study by the Institute on Metropolitan Opportunity at the University of Minnesota Law School showed that charter schools in Chicago underperform comparable traditional public schools and are more highly segregated by race. So charter schools are worse at giving students an education, are more expensive, and are more racially segregated. That's their conclusion. The analysis used comprehensive data from Chicago schools in 2012 and 2013 and controlled for the mix of students and other challenges faced by individual schools. The findings, consistent with previous IMO evaluations of charter schools in the Twin Cities using similar data and methods, showed that, so now they've proven this in two places, in the Twin Cities, Minneapolis, St. Paul, and Chicago, doing a study over an entire year. So they found that reading and math pass rates in Chicago charters lagged behind those in traditional schools by up to 4%. Reading and math growth rates in charters trailed traditional schools by roughly 4%. Charter school graduation rates lagged by even greater amounts. There were, for the most part, no statistically significant differences between charter and traditional schools in ACT test scores. The findings actually understate the performance gap because students self-select into the charter system. Student performance should exceed what one sees in traditional schools, even if charters do no better at teaching their students. In other words, better students go to charter schools, bad students are kicked out of charter schools, so they should be performing better, even if they don't teach as well. Just by statistics, you've got better students. You don't have bad students. You should be performing better, and still they're not. They even have the better students, and they still can't perform better than public schools. Charters are much less likely to be racially or ethnically diverse. Only 7% of charters showed some degree of ethnic diversity. 7%. 1 in 14 in the form of schools with mixed Black and Latino student populations, compared to about 20% in traditional schools that showed either racial or ethnic diversity. After controlling for school characteristics, Chicago School District selective schools and schools for gifted students outperformed charter and traditional schools on most measures, while magnet school students perform much like their traditional school counterparts. All three school types are more likely to be racially diverse than charter and traditional schools. Myron Orfield, director of the Institute on Metropolitan Opportunity, said the question is whether charters are the best path available to find ways to better serve low-income students and students of color, given that this approach has failed to improve overall student performance by most measures and led to less racial and ethnic diversity in the city schools. The study argues that these negative findings mean it's time to reevaluate where the Chicago school system is headed. It recommends that Chicago Public School District institute a 3-year moratorium on new charter schools and campuses and complete an impact study on how charter school policy is affected the district as a whole. The State Charter School Commission be eliminated and policy and control decisions be returned to local authorities. The state remove the provision from the charter school law that exempts campus expansions from their charter school cap. Measures be implemented to ensure that charter schools do not deepen racial segregation, and so forth. They give many more ideas on what people should be doing in order to fight this. So, what was the charter school industry's response? Well, while it should have been, we find this study from the University of Minnesota very intriguing, and we are going to examine it to see, thoroughly examine it to see what we can do better as charter schools and to see the validity of it. We are going to be looking over their methodology. You could just say, yeah, we are actually going to look at that study. That's what you should say if you're somebody who's concerned about the education of students. If your priority is the education of those students, then that's what you would say. You would say, all right, I'm going to read that, and I'm going to see what it says. Instead, Andrew Broy, president of the Illinois Network of Charter Schools, called the report a policy piece masquerading as research. Now, that sounds like a little bit of thou protest too much, because why would you say something like that that sounds like it's more about an attack on the study than a consideration of the study, unless you are somebody who is desperately trying to protect your profits, more so than trying to get a good education to students. And it's also weird to call it a policy piece masquerading as research, because I think the study just revealed that your business, charter schools, is profiteering masquerading as education. This week, the city of Chicago passed the budget, and the city council then gave Mayor Rahm Emanuel a standing ovation. You do know, councilmen and women, all the aldermen and women in the city, when you give the mayor a standing ovation, that makes you all look like a bunch of rubber stamps, ass-kicking, toe-licking grovelers to the mayor. Well, I guess that he's now going to be reelected as Bob Fioretti gets ready to be the party's fall guy. Maybe it's not such a bad idea to suck up to the guy whose rich friends now own the city after he sold it to them. Oh, good Lord, I'm really afraid now that Karen Lewis has dropped out of the race that we're looking at more Rahm Emanuel. And one more term of Rahm Emanuel might get Chicagoans to start thinking, oh, name recognition, we should just keep voting him in over and over and over again, no matter what he does, just like Richard M. Daley and the way that he bankrupted the city. And then people went out and said, oh, I'm going to keep voting for this guy over and over again. On the line with us right now is our newest correspondent, Anuradha Mittal. She works with the Oakland Institute. Recently, last week, she was at a protest in Washington, D.C., a creative resistance outside of the World Bank's annual meeting. Good morning, Anuradha.
Good morning. How are you?
Great. It's great to have you on the show and as a new irregular correspondent on our show to cover development, especially when it comes to land development. So tell us what happened at the World Bank protest last week. And I thought World Bank protests went out of style after 9/11. They used to have them all the time before 9/11, and then as soon as 9/11 rolled around, everybody forgot about them.
Well, exactly. I mean, I think, Chuck, that's why this creative resistance, which took place outside the World Bank meetings in Washington, D.C., is so special because, first of all, it was global in nature. There were actions taking place in more than 11 cities around the world, including in India and Nigeria and Sierra Leone to England, New York. And the goal of these creative resistance was to send a very clear message to the World Bank that we came to know as the one promoting structural adjustment programs, that your new policies are leading to people being dispossessed of their land, their water, their natural resources through a policy called Doing Business Rankings. So this creative resistance was organized by a multi-continental campaign called Our Land, Our Business, to say that the bank needs to stop doing these doing business rankings, which rank countries on the basis of what they're like to do business with. So it does not include if you have no corruption in your country, if you have great human rights records. It's not that you get a good ranking. This is really about giving a good business ranking when a country does away with, labor rights such as minimum wage, or if a country says to a foreign company that you can set up shop here without doing environmental impact assessments, they get a good ranking.
The point of protests like this is to bring attention, in this case, to World Bank policies. But unfortunately, just like the protests that happened before 9/11 that were against the IMF, that were opposed to the World Bank, unfortunately, those protests often are ignored by the media. And when we don't have much of an impact on the World Bank because it's not necessarily a democratic institution, I'm concerned that they are just going to ignore any kind of popular pressure on them. What could cause the World Bank to change their policies?
That's an excellent question, Chuck, because on one hand, just, in the past few days, we have seen an article in the New York Times which is urging, for instance, the government of India to make further reforms in labor to make the country attractive to foreign businesses. Now, how would India become attractive if labor gets rid of more and more rights so they do not have to deal with the pesky labor, protests and demands for better wages, for safety around, occupational hazards? So, yes, there's definitely a big push by the mainstream corporate media to keep pushing for deregulation of economy, especially in the global south, so it becomes more and more profitable for corporations. Now, in the wake of this, one might say, why would the World Bank give a damn? But I think we have to think about the global opposition that was built around structural adjustment programs, not necessarily covered by the Wall Street Journals and the New York Times, but it grew so much that the World Bank had to deal with it. And I'm very glad to share that before the creative resistance took place, there was a panel, for instance, inside the World Bank buildings, where you had farmers from Mali, from Kenya. You had a gentleman, Okok Ojolu, from Ethiopia, who used to actually run the World Bank Social Fund in his region in Ethiopia, protested the government's policies around land leases, and today is living as a political refugee in Kenya. And he talked about the experiences of the communities and what's happening on the ground. And in fact, the team that is responsible for these indicators at the World Bank, the top officials, they all came out to hear, to listen. And of course, one of them was audacious enough to say that we work on World Bank and land grabs because it's sexy.
God. So is the World Bank, are they reacting to developing world country concerns? And if they are, and they're not just listening to the Washington consensus, why are they doing that now?
Well, I think it's really about exposing. I think what the campaign Our Land of Business has managed to do is, since over this past year, they have exposed to the world what the World Bank's doing business rankings actually mean, what the impact of these policies is on communities, on smallholder farmers, on the economies in the global south, as I said before. Because till now, we didn't know about these rankings. That analysis had not been put forward. In fact, one of the things I was struck by is that, in fact, there was an internal review done by the bank itself last year on the impact of doing business rankings, and the review showed that these rankings are pretty disastrous. Now, instead of doing away with these rankings, the bank decided to embark on a new project, basically come up with new indicators on the business of doing agriculture. And this is really at the behest and the push of the Gates Foundation and the G8 countries. So instead of doing away with its rankings or report card, which is quite scandalous because it's creating a race to the bottom, it has been pushed into doing these kind of rankings in the field of agriculture. And it's also shocking because today, as we hear about the indigenous, the pastoralists, whether it's in Kenya or Tanzania or Ethiopia or Papua New Guinea or in Cambodia, where people are losing their land rights, facing widespread human rights abuses, environmental devastation, it's quite shocking that the bank would continue with its business as usual.
Is the bank being pushed, or are they ideologically ready to accept these doing business measures and that kind of thing being applied to agriculture? Is this more about ideology, or is this more about political pressure?
I think it's a combination of the both. If you look at the checkered history of the World Bank and its ideology, which has really been about praying at the altar of free market, that development will come to countries only through foreign direct investment, without questioning investment for who, what benefits, what are the impacts, that ideological framework, which believes that the smallholder farmers are really successful only when they participate in the export economy and never bothering to kind of determine what incomes they get. For instance, the coffee producers who live on less than $600 a year, and you would need at least $7,000 to $8,000 a year to survive with dignity. They never bother to do those impact assessments. But it's the ideological belief that they keep pushing that development will happen through business, through corporations, and the more rights we give to corporations, all boats will rise. But the evidence, unfortunately, which the bank officials don't look at because of they're blinded by the ideology, they miss out that it's a few yachts that are rising.
You mentioned the Gates Foundation. How does the Gates Foundation play into that? Because there is the media narrative here in the U.S. on the big media, the media with the capital T and the capital M, that the Gates Foundation, Bill Gates, only does great things for the world, and this is an amazing sacrifice, and this is incredibly charitable, how much money he gives to his foundation in order to help out others. Is there another side of the Gates Foundation? Does the Gates Foundation do good things and they do bad things?
Well, I think it's very important for our listeners to know that instead of just following what we read in the mainstream media coming out from countries such as the United States, we really need to speak to the people who are supposed to benefit from this generous giving of philanthropies such as the Gates Foundation. Now, this is a foundation which has been promoting, as we know, AGRA, whose ideology is based on that we need to promote green revolution in Africa, because in the first instance, when it went to places like India, Africa was ignored. This is a philosophy which believes that if we provide improved seeds and more herbicides, now we are talking about, for instance, Roundup Ready corn seeds. So you give them Roundup Ready seeds and then you provide them Roundup. That's what would bring Africa into the 21st century. Now, they're completely ignoring the impact of the Green Revolution and what it has done in terms of the environment, the debts it has put on farmers. We can look at India, where farmers basically have gone into such debts that over the last decade, it is estimated nearly 300,000 farmers have taken their own lives. So it is this whole corporatization of agriculture and an ideological belief that the successful farmers are those who are participating in the global economy, and forgetting that even today, 70 to 80% of the food that is consumed in today's world comes from smallholder farmers. So when you find the fact that you're feeding your families and communities as being irrelevant because you're not participating in the global economy, that's pretty serious. And if you look at the resistance that is coming out of Africa, as I said, in Washington, D.C., there was a farmer from the largest farmers union in West Africa. There were people who were working in Nairobi, Kenya, and all over Africa around protecting Africa's seed and fertilizer markets before they're taken over by Monsanto's and Dow and Syngenta. They have a very clear critique of the intervention of the Gates Foundation. And as you said, unfortunately, we don't hear that critique in the mainstream media.
We don't hear anything about the World Bank or the IMF in the U.S. mainstream media. But you do write or in the press release for this creative resistance that you were doing at Washington, D.C., outside of the World Bank headquarters during their annual meeting. The D.C. event is drawing support from a wide range of activist communities, including Occupy groups, who will join representatives of impacted communities from Kenya, Mali, and Ethiopia. While the World Bank and the IMF may be nearly profanities here in the United States on our media because you never hear those words ever uttered, is the World Bank and the IMF a big story in places like Kenya, Mali, and Ethiopia? Does their media talk about the World Bank and the IMF and how they have an impact on them in their news, but we just don't report it here?
Well, definitely. I mean, if you look at the media in countries which are impacted by this doing business rankings, they are talking about the impact and the power institutions such as the World Bank have on the political elites. In Ethiopia, it's a different story because here is a country with no free press, with most of its journalists either behind bar or living in exile. But if you meet the people who are facing and are impacted by the policies, they are talking about it. You find the stories in African media. It is really in the Western media we've built this image that everything that is done in Washington, D.C. or in Geneva or Brussels is for the good of the third world countries, because the belief is the third world countries cannot decide for themselves. They cannot prosper. They cannot, economically benefit and grow till the West intervenes. So these are really, you have to look at the structures of power and power relations. But one thing to mention, Chuck, what you just said, it was quite beautiful in Washington, D.C. to see the people who had come out from Africa to be supported by the Occupied movement, because suddenly there was a global movement which was challenging the 1% of the North and the South. And it was a coming together of the 99% who are hurting, who are without jobs, who are losing their lands and their livelihoods. So it was quite incredible, and the creative resistance, which was attended by, as you said, the Occupied groups, the Occupied group in New York had made beautiful signs that they sent in with Reverend Billy. And, it was festive, and it was a celebration of the 99% of the Global South and the Global North coming together.
In your press release on the creative resistance at the World Bank, there's a quote from an Alnor Lada who says, "If the World Bank keeps promoting economic activity that destroys biodiversity and the livelihoods of smallholder farmers, pastoralists, and indigenous communities, they should not have a mandate to exist." How much is the BRICS Bank a solution for this? Can we just sit around and wait and hope for the World Bank finally to become so unpopular or unneeded or have a competition or a challenge from something like the BRICS Bank? Can we just hope for this to work out?
Well, there are two parts that are, on one hand, of course, we need institutions in regions and countries which meet the needs of the people, which are aware of what the people need, because very often we have solutions being promoted from the north for problems that don't exist or not other main problems for the communities. So definitely it is very important to think of institutions that are based in regions, in countries which meet the needs of the communities and are in touch with the communities. But the bigger issue than that is that one of ideology. As long as we keep promoting the same ideology, even if we create banks, the African Development Bank, the Asian Development Bank, but where the ideology remains the same, that the free market is a silver bullet solution to all crises that we see in the world. That the large-scale plantations are going to feed the world while we deal with climate crisis. That kind of ignorance, if that continues, whether it's a BRICS bank or whichever bank, if it is not in tune with the people on the ground, it would be a useless effort.
But Anuradha, you know that the free market and military reactions to everything always works out great.
Well, these solutions work out because it is the political powers that are making those decisions. But I think you and I, there's no rocket science in terms of determining if they work out great. We have seen the solutions from whether it's Afghanistan to Iraq to now to Syria to what happened in Libya. These efforts, which are short-sighted efforts aimed at profiteering a handful of corporations, do not work out. They do not bring about peace. They do not bring about security for northern nations. Neither do they deal with the issues that they're talking about, bring about democracy or deal with food insecurity or climate justice issues. So these are false solutions that are put out there because our democracies have been taken over by the corporate powers. The World Bank could very well be a corporate bank. And if you look at its history, given its mandate to end poverty, 70-year history, which is pockmarked with just failures over and over again. If free market really worked, this bank would have shut down a long time ago. A bank with so many failed investments which failed to accomplish what its goal was would have been shut down. Bank of America, Wells Fargo could not survive. But this bank continues because its unstated goal is to assist the corporations of northern countries to thrive, to prosper at the expense of the poor in the poor world.
Right. And I was thinking about how that wealth is being more centralized, how there's a greater disparity of wealth around the world. You write, if you look behind many of the recent land grabs, you will find World Bank policies that enable investors to come in with projects that promise benefits to communities but don't follow through. We can keep going after each corporation and investment group, but it would be more effective if the World Bank stopped using their immense political and financial power to pave the way for what has become the systematic exploitation of land and people. So being that it has been so centralized, that wealth has been so centralized, that we keep seeing the Dow Jones, well, until recently, we keep seeing the Dow Jones go up. We keep seeing the meters that they show on the news, the S&P, the NASDAQ, going up. The economy's getting better. Things are better for Wall Street. As long as these things are better for Wall Street, shouldn't we just assume that the World Bank will just keep doing these things because their real patrons are Wall Street?
Well, definitely. It was very interesting at the panel organized inside the World Bank buildings. One of the top officials basically said, why are you criticizing the World Bank? We are not buying land in Cambodia or Ethiopia ourselves. We are not doing it, so how can you make those linkages? But it's fascinating that thanks to the policies of these institutions, you find, for instance, investment agencies that have been set up in every country with a different name. But if you look beyond the language, whether it is Portuguese in Mozambique or Swahili in another country, you find it is identical. The blueprint has been provided by the World Bank. So it is really the facilitation of policies where you find, and this was the argument put forward by the community members who came from different countries in Africa, that really our democracy is being impacted when we cannot have access to our policymakers to be able to come up with policies that meet our needs. Because what they should be doing, for instance, making land easily accessible by foreign investors, by ensuring that they provide all kind of tax incentives. Those dictates are coming from Washington, D.C., from the World Bank institution. So within that climate, it is very obvious that this is an institution that is working for the corporations, that it sees economic benefits of investors as everyone is doing well. It is full of very smart economists and sociologists and agricultural experts. But all of those technologies and the knowledge has been sidelined, and it's moving forward with one ideology, which is how do we get few people to profiteer? And there, I'm guessing, there are the backgrounds of the people, where they're coming from to work at the World Bank, from the different Wall Street places. That is the interest they will represent. In the wake of this, you might say, so what is the hope? And I'll tell you so, listening to the people who were in Washington, D.C., Ruth, who had traveled from Kenya, or listening to Okok, who had spent many years in a jail in Ethiopia after working for the World Bank to speak out for his people, or you see the courage of this farmer who had come from Mali, Ibrahima. I think the question really is that this false ideology, which promotes the interest of very few, can it really stand up to this movement and resistance growing from below? And whether it is Papua New Guinea or whether it is Ethiopia, one thing we at the Oakland Institute constantly hear is, this is our land, this is where we were born, and we will die for it. So I think there's some very stark choices here to be made. What the outcome will be and when it will be, one doesn't know. But this is a movement that is not going away.
In your press release, it says the World Bank's lending to developing countries reached $35 billion in 2012. How dependent, how addicted is the developing world to World Bank money, so they're too weak or too dependent on that money to fight any World Bank policy decisions?
Well, that's an excellent point to make, Chuck, that yes, this institution has so much of political clout because it is providing credit. And again, it is important to remember for what kind of projects. So it is not that these monies that are coming in are actually bringing about, food security, livelihood creations for the poor in these countries. These are monies that are coming in for some very bad projects which lead to further food insecurity and dispossession of people. So given that instance, I think this is really about movements demanding, which has happened in the past, that we do not want your funding. At the Creative Resistance, we had Medha Patkar of Narbada Bachao Andolan, which has been challenging this large dam that is being built over River Narbada in India, displacing hundreds of thousands of the indigenous people of India and the smallholder farmers. And because of that mobilization, they were able to kind of get World Bank to pull out its funding. So I think we should not just believe because the bank is giving money, it's bringing about development. It uses that power to control the political and economic elites and to put forward their agenda in these countries.
I want to ask you a question that I asked Arundhati Roy last week when we were talking about her book, Capitalism, A Ghost Story. Is the problem here capitalism, or is the problem here the capitalism that we have chosen to follow? Is the problem the idea of capitalism, or is the problem what we have done to capitalism?
That's an interesting question. I think the problem really is one of capitalism, where we have created societies where we believe the survival of the fittest, where we believe that the nation state has no role, where we believe that we need more and more deregulation so the nation state can become so small that it can be drowned in the bathtub. When you are getting rid of governance structures, and then I think you have created a capitalism system which has the fault line between the North and the South, which is a fault line between the rich and the poor. And you've created a system that works for the rich and the powerful against the vast majority who are poor without political rights and economic rights. So within that scenario, this is the face of capitalism. And I'm not sure if you've known it to operate in any way better. The whole idea of a welfare state, the whole idea of a state being a democracy of the people, by the people, for the people, even here in this country where we talk so much about democracy, has basically been thrown out of the window. So you have a state which does not represent the needs of the people, which is not in tune with the people, which represses what their aspirations are. So given that, I'm not sure if it is just this idea of capitalism, because if you look at the history of capitalism in its different forms in different places, It has been very oppressive.
So is the answer then, this is a question I was going to ask Arundhati, we never got around to it, is the answer then that what we need is a more humane capitalism, and that more humane capitalism is socialism?
Well, Chuck, personally, I think it's very important to remember that we want a world which does not have dictators, even if they're benevolent dictators. And I say that in reference to this whole idea of humane and kind capitalism. We really need a society where human rights, both at individual and collective aspects, are respected and honored. So we're not talking about the charitable doings of corporations or governments. We're talking about governments which respect and protect and fulfill human rights of communities as well as of individuals. So using the human rights framework is a very different concept than looking for a system that is working for the majority of the people. We live in a society where corporations have rights of an individual, whereas individuals have no rights. So we really need to challenge that as a civilized society to be able to see that these corporations, which are nothing else but manifestations of us, whether for furthering our economic profits or whatever, that it needs to serve the larger purpose, which is ensure human rights of all and everyone in this world.
From your press release again, to coincide with the hashtag World versus Bank, that's World vs. Bank mobilization, the Oakland Institute, your organization that you work with, one of the world's leading think tanks on land issues, is releasing a new study tackling the bank's approach to land, agriculture, and development, Unfolding Truth, Dismantling the World Bank's Myths on Agriculture and Development. In addition, the Institute will also release 6 new country fact sheets that expose the reforms promoted by the World Bank in Kenya, Uganda, Democratic Republic of Congo, Laos, Cambodia, and Uruguay. In each country, the bank's policies have served as a catalyst for massive land grabs, dispossession, and forced eviction of countless small-scale farmers. You can find all of that at the Oakland Institute website. Again, follow the hashtag World versus Bank. Anuradha, this has been yet another fantastic conversation with you. I am so glad that we're going to have you on 3, 4, maybe 5 times a year now to discuss development and what's happening in particular with land and the World Bank policies. I really am incredibly delighted to have you as part of our staff. Thank you so much. And your segment today was spectacular as always. Thank you so much, Anuradha. Not only for the work that you
is all mine.
Not only for the work that you do, but also for joining us. Thank you very much, Anuradha.
Thank you.
Have a great weekend.
You too. Thanks. Speak soon.
All right. This is Hell every Saturday morning at 9 a.m. We're going till 1 p.m. today. Well, Alex, we got a couple of things we should probably do. I'm going to mention the new question from Hell in the last segment after Jeff. Before Jeff, I am going to tell people how they can win through the email that we sent out. So I guess now we should be doing the question from Hell winner, right? Am I right, Alex?
That sounds right to me.
Yeah, it sounds right to me, too. All right, so let's go through this real quick. Again, our question from Hell for our listeners for this week. Best 2 responses get a copy of Naomi Klein's new book, This Changes Everything, Capitalism versus Climate Change, which everyone is talking about. Alex, any of the ones that you have over there after the post by Robert that you really like?
I'm looking. I did give money to the person begging to you outside your car. Do it today.
Okay, who wrote that?
That was Bill W.
Bill W., you are one of our winners. And let's go with Ryan Cunningham. Sorry, we gave out your last name. Ryan, who wrote Close Schools, Ban Christmas. So let's get in touch with those 2 and send them copies of Naomi Klein's new book. What do you say?
Yep, got that. I'll try to get in touch with them. If you see me mentioning you, write me back so I can get in touch with you.
Yeah,
guys.
last week, Richard Montalvo won the question from Hell and was supposed to get free passes to go see Oobleck tonight. I emailed him. I sent him a Facebook message. Never heard back from him. So sorry, Richard. If you don't get in touch with us, there's nothing we can do. And by the way, if you do win on the show, you can only win once a year. I mean, you can give us your response to the question from Hell, but we can't give out more than one prize a year to somebody because we don't want just one person representing us when they show up at events. And the other thing is we want to make sure that everybody in our audience has an opportunity at these gifts. By the way, Naomi Klein not only have a couple of our listeners just won free copies of her new book, This Changes Everything, Capitalism versus climate change. But she'll be speaking next Wednesday, October 29th, in a public program at the Drake Hotel. It's Capitalism versus the Climate. The Drake Hotel, 140 East Walton Place. Registration starts at 5:30 a week from Wednesday, then presentation and audience Q&A, followed at 7:15 p.m. by adjournment and a book signing. So our two winners today, Bill W. and Ryan, you could actually go to this event and have your book signed by Naomi Klein. We're going to be giving out a couple more copies next week, and we'll tell you how you can win those later on. So Naomi's going to be speaking over there again. It's on Wednesday, October 29th. It's at the Drake Hotel, 140 East Walton. Starts at 5:30. To find out more, you have to go to the website of the Chicago Council on Global Affairs, Chicago Council on Global Affairs. We will, of course, give you more information on that next week because I didn't put down the link to where you can find that. But you can just go to their damn site and you can find it yourself. All right, what else do I got here to share with you? Oh, yes. I guess we can do this giveaway, the Scalibration giveaway. That'll be in the next break. So let's do that in the next break so we don't confuse people. So I guess we got some twist off knowledge. No, we don't. Tonight is the last night of the new Theodore Oobleck show, Baudelaire in a Box, Episode 7, The King of Rain, the seventh installment in Oobleck's epic attempt to translate the entirety of Charles Baudelaire's Les Fleurs du Mal. Features 15 new Kent historias designed and illustrated by This Is Hell correspondent Dave Buchan, with music and translations by Emmy Bean, T. Roy Martin, Chris Schoen, and Sad Brad Smith. They'll be joined by Ronnie Cooler on accordion and violin, and Joseph Spielberg on bass. Again, tonight's the last night, The King of Rain, and it happens last night, 8 p.m. at the Charnel House, 3421 West Fullerton here in Chicago. $15 suggested donation. More if you've got it. Free if you are broke. Are you maybe eating some breakfast sausage or some bacon right now? Well, chew it up real good and swallow right now, because after our next conversation, it may be the last processed meat you eat. 2014 winner of the National Press Club Award and James Aronson Award for Social Justice Journalism, Ted Genoways, returns to This Is Hell. He has a new book out entitled The Chain, Farm, Factory, and the Fate of Our Food. Welcome back to This Is Hell, Ted.
Thanks for having me back.
It's great to have you back on the show. We had you on one of our couple of years ago, 2013. We did shows on Wednesday night. Ted joined us for the entire hour one evening, and it was a fantastic interview. So as soon as Alex heard that this book was coming out, we did what we could to get you back on the show. You start your book with an awful story of Maria Lopez, who was working the Hormel line back in 2004, when, as you write, the pace of work had always been steady, but the speed of the line had jumped recently from 1,000 hogs per hour to more than 1,100. Lopez was having trouble keeping up. Her coworker reached for one of the other pork shoulders. She rushed to clear the cutting area, and her fingers slipped toward the saw blade. Lopez snatched her hand back, but it was too late. Her index finger dangled by a flap of skin. The bone cut clean through. She screamed as blood spurted and covered her workstation. She went and got medical attention, ended up having to get several surgeries that shortened her fingers, but that day on the line, again as you write, while she sprinted to the nurse's station and was taken to the Fremont Area Medical Center, while she waited finger-wrapped in the emergency room for the surgeon to drive in from Omaha, the cut line at Hormel continued to run. That hour, like every hour, without interruption, the plant processed 1,100 hogs, their carcasses butchered into parts and marketed as Cure 81 hams or Black Label bacon, the scraps collected and ground up to make Spam and Little Sizzler's breakfast sausages. Her co-workers were instructed by floor supervisors to wash the station of her blood, but the line never stopped. Look, I've never had much faith in Hormel products. They're low cost, they're low quality in my opinion. So is Hormel low-hanging fruit when it comes to investigating factory farms for suspicious health standards, if not health violations?
Well, there may be some truth to that, but to me, what made Hormel an important company to look at as a case study is that they are perhaps the vanguard of the new standard for pork production in the country. They, starting just a little over a decade ago, got a special exemption from the USDA to be part of, to bring all of their cut and kill operations into a pilot program that would allow production lines to run as fast as possible to see how that would affect food safety. So when you look at what's happening at Hormel, what you're really seeing is what the possible future for the entire industry may be.
So how did it affect worker safety and food safety?
Well, that's just the thing, is that if you ask the USDA, the line is that that they're primarily concerned with food safety, that everything is still within parameters, that there's nothing to worry about. But what the USDA's Office of Inspector General said just last year was that, just looking at the food safety issue, that having allowed 5 plants to enter into this pilot program and to test unlimited line speeds, that 3 out of the 5 plants wound up among the 10 worst food violators in the entire country, and that's out of 616 plants. And it's hard for me to understand why you would take the worst plants and make them the model going forward. And then, as you suggest, it's not just about food safety. It's also about worker safety and about environmental safety, and the effects in those other areas have been devastating.
But does the industry really care about that, or are they only looking at how much food they can get on the? I mean, is the USDA considering worker safety, or are they pushing that off to OSHA, and then OSHA is looking into that?
That's right. So the USDA says, worker safety is not our area. That's OSHA. But the simple fact of the matter is that that line speed is determined by the USDA. And so even if OSHA says this is putting workers at risk, there's very little that OSHA can do directly to affect the way that the plants are run. And the thing is that this is really common sense as far as I'm concerned, that if you are increasing line speeds steadily, and you look at a company like Hormel, their line speed has increased by 50% in less than a decade, while the workforce has grown by only about 10 to 20%. That tells you that everybody is working much, much faster, and that's in a situation where you're working with extremely sharp instruments, where you're working sometimes with saws, and the risk should be obvious, I would think.
So the government selects how many hogs you can process an hour. So is this, get ready for this, Ted, is this a problem of government interference?
Well, this is, in my opinion, a problem of not nearly enough government interference. Okay. I mean, the situation has always been that line speed is determined by the rate of inspection. That ever since the institution of federal inspectors, following the publication of Upton Sinclair's The Jungle and the governmental reforms that came after that you couldn't run the line faster than inspectors could inspect each carcass and approve it. What this experimental program is doing is saying, we're going to allow these companies to self-inspect, and we will do spot checking of their self-inspection to assure that it is accurate. And so what you're really getting is reduced government inspection, reduced government involvement, and what the Inspector General found was that when you reduce the number of federal inspectors and hand that over to the private companies, that, surprise, surprise, the amount of food safety violations go way up.
But I would assume that this would lead to more profits for places like Hormel. And as we all know, Ted, trickle-down economics always works. So I'd assume that the workers who are working in these processing facilities for Hormel now are being rewarded with higher pay and are maybe even attracting at least more skilled workers. So are these profits turning into better working, or at least better pay for the workers?
Certainly not. And you know, the Hormel's profits are way up. The shareholders, you know, have seen a huge jump in the value of Hormel stock. But over the same time, the pay for workers has remained static. You talk to the workers at a place like the flagship plant in Austin, Minnesota, and they often refer to this penny a year increase because the starting salary for workers at a place like QPP, Quality Pork Processors, which is the cut and kill operation there, the starting hourly wage for someone is 30 cents higher than it was 30 years ago. And so obviously, you know, with the cost of living increase and all of these sorts of things, the buying power for a worker who's starting at Hormel or at QPP now is much lower than it was a generation ago, even though the company is far more profitable and passing along far more profit to the shareholders.
How much of that fault is due to the workers' unwillingness, maybe, or a lack of, I don't know, how much of that is due to the fact that workers are not organizing? They are not making a union. How much of that is due to a lack of a labor movement among the workers, that it's their fault?
Yeah. Well, so it's the way that the union interacts with the company is central to the whole issue. The workers who were at Hormel used to have one of the strongest unions in the country. But when they went out on strike in 1985, a long strike that stretched into 86, and eventually were undercut by the union leadership in D.C., essentially the local union there in Austin was hobbled forever. And they just don't have the same clout with the leadership at Hormel that they used to. And so the union is less active. The workers are less likely to participate in union activity. And then there's also the fact that as the company has tended to hire more immigrant labor, there are cultural differences that keep the workforce from effectively organizing.
So how much of this is our fault for wanting food that has a low cost? Or is this not about our demand for food that's at a low cost? Is the success of Hormel more just due to poverty?
Well, I think that there's no question that when the housing crisis and then the recession kicked in 06, 07, Hormel saw a record jump in the sales of Spam. And it makes perfect sense that a product that was originally introduced during the Great Depression and has seen its greatest sales during recessions ever since, it is a staple of times of economic downturn. It's inexpensive meat at a time when you can't afford to buy something better. But I don't think that means that that the company is justified in mistreating its workers or certainly placing them at risk. And you know, I think it's an open question how much cost it would actually add to even a low-end product like that to simply institute higher wages and safer conditions.
So when we choose convenience over quality or low cost over quality, we are choosing having worse working conditions for those employed at processing facilities. We are choosing lower wages for those people. We are choosing food that is of lower quality for us and has such an impact on the market as a whole that these and the related problems associated with factory farming spreads. But not all of us can spend more money on meat, that we cannot afford quality over convenience. So how much of the problem of our food supply is the fact that it caters to those on limited budgets who live in or near or below poverty levels? How much is the problem with our food supply the need to cater to those who are in poverty?
Well, I think there's some of that, to be sure, and especially not just Americans living in poverty, but as these companies are trying to sell their product into other parts of the world that have different standards of living, and so as they're attempting to make this a global product that is profitable for them, regardless of what part of the world they're selling in, yes, it becomes a system that is really geared toward volume and toward value, if you can think of it in that way, as opposed to quality, and certainly it disregards things such as workers' rights and environmental safety. Those things are regarded as being sort of incidental to the business model. So I think that's certainly part of it. But the conundrum of this, right, is certainly that simply going to the grocery store and saying, well, what I'm going to do is buy, organic, welfare-approved pork, and I'm going to eat less of it, and I'm going to individually reduce a little bit of my impact. While that is an important piece of things, it's not the overall solution. What we really need here, more than anything else, is government intervention and a little bit of political courage from the top to say what we need is a system that is totally revamped.
We are speaking with Ted Genoways. His new book is The Chain, Farm, Factory, and the Fate of Our Food. And man, I really love the cover. The jacket of your book is really fantastic. We were just wanted to ask you about this whole situation with what you're saying about how you could possibly just get better food, pay better, or not have as much meat. I know I'm going to get an email from somebody who's going to say, see, vegetarianism is the answer. But I know that there are problems, farm worker condition problems on vegetable farms as well. So
Absolutely.
Is vegetarianism the answer?
I don't think it's as simple as that. I think what the real answer is trying to find a system that is sustainable at smaller sizes, from farm to production to distribution. And I realize that is a challenging thing as our population booms. But the reality is that the problems really come into effect regardless of the industry, as you say, when you start trying to do things at certain scales. And so you end up, by virtue of trying to go large scale, you end up specializing, and you do things like taxing the soil, which requires more fertilizer, which requires more pesticides and more herbicides, and which has the environmental impact. But as you say, all those things, get sprayed onto the vegetables, and the impact on the workers in the field who are picking lettuce that has been sprayed with lots of toxic chemicals that they are getting on their hands and inhaling as they're working, that's a problem too. And so it's not as simple as saying this food product is good and that food product is bad. It's really about trying to take a bigger view of things and find ways of growing food for a large population that is sustainable long term.
When we were just discussing about how people might just want to go vegetarian, or people might just want to see their solution is shopping at Whole Foods, can all of us who are not poor simply say this is a problem, this is a poor people problem, I go to Whole Foods? How much does the ability of the middle class to choose better food actually undermine the campaign for higher quality food and better working conditions for food workers?
Well, it's a complex question. I mean, to me, I think it is good for people to show that there is a market for high quality products, that people are willing to spend a little bit extra money and consume a little bit less in order to improve their own health and the health of their families, in terms of the quality of the food that they're getting, but also hopefully reduce the impact a bit of the agricultural practices that produce that food. And as the industry sees that there's a growing number of people doing that sort of thing, that does put economic pressure on them to reform. My concern is that that also creates a situation where there's a tendency to demonize the poor. And that always worries me, because I don't want people to come away from this thinking, well, if I go and buy a grass-fed burger, then I'm, morally superior to the person who's at the McDonald's drive-thru. Often our food choices are constrained by our economic income. And what we really need is, as I said before, leadership that encourages a system that produces high quality and healthful food for everybody.
We were mentioning before we were talking about union organizing, and I had a follow-up question to it, and I just jumped to the next question. But how much of the degradation of food quality and, well, not just worker conditions, but food quality, how much do you think that is caused by the weakening of the labor movement when it comes to the processing industry?
I think it's undeniable. I think every single line speed increase has to be negotiated with the union, and there are systems engineers who come through and check the line speed to make sure that it is being enforced. And the company is always pushing for the line to go a little bit faster. The union is always exerting some resistance. But the reality is that these days, the union resistance usually takes the form of asking for additional positions to be created on the line in order to meet that higher speed, as opposed to actually resisting the speed increase. And I think that's directly due to the fact that the union just doesn't have nearly the same amount of bargaining power that it did a generation ago.
The great thing about your book is not just the background information, not just the context, but you tell the stories of people who actually work in these facilities. You mentioned this gentleman by the name of Matthew Garcia, who is working at the Brain Machine on the kill floor, where he puts in a high-pressure air hose into the head of the hog to blow out its brains so they can use the brains for some product. And in the air, there just seems to be a mist in the air of this kind of brain-like matter just everywhere. And eventually, all the people who this Matthew Garcia works with and Matthew Garcia get neurological disorders that doctors have difficulty diagnosing. But Matthew Garcia is a name you use to protect the anonymity of the real person who is affected. You write, Matthew Garcia is the name I've given him to shield him from immigration and customs enforcement, but I don't know his real name anyway. All I know is the name on his driver's license, his I-9s and ITINs, his medical records and workers' comp claims. All I know is the name on his Social Security card, but that name belongs to someone else. Someone in Texas, in prison or worse, someone with a suitably Hispanic name who sold his information or had it stolen from him. There is no Matthew Garcia in Austin, Minnesota working at Hormel, and if you go looking, you won't find him. So how much is the meat processing industry dependent on undocumented labor, and did that increase when all of a sudden they got this ability to be deregulated?
Well, and that last point is just it. So it starts with the union being weakened. And in Austin, it's especially, in Austin, Minnesota, where Hormel is headquartered, it's especially stark, because you have this strike that ends in 1986. One of the provisions of the strike agreement, the ending of the strike agreement, is that the union will get preferential hiring for positions as they become available in the plant. That the scab workers who were hired during the strike will not be put out of positions, but as they leave, their union counterparts will be hired back into the plant. Instead, within a matter of months, Hormel said, now this half of the plant, we're going to call a different company. And that company is called Quality Pork. They pay less. They don't have a contract with the union. And though that's all the equipment that we purchased and placed there, though it's within the four walls of the Hormel plant, it's a different company as of today. And so And once they started hiring workers into QPP, overwhelmingly the workers that they hired in the late 80s into the early 90s were undocumented Hispanic workers, primarily coming from Mexico. And before long, there was a kind of informal route of bringing workers from Mexico to Austin and other parts of the Hormel supply chain. Hormel is not unique in this by any means. The meatpacking industry is overwhelmingly run by undocumented immigrant labor. But certainly, once the line speed starts to increase, and once Hormel gets the special arrangement that allows them to run their lines faster, the immigrant labor becomes a kind of ideal workforce for that kind of corporate leadership, because they're not in any position to complain. They don't have the union backing, but also when they get injured, they're far less likely to report those injuries to workers' comp. And even when they did report those injuries, as was the case with Matthew Garcia and some of his coworkers, then the company came to them and said, "We have questions about your immigration status." And many of those workers, fearing that they would be deported, left the company and left the state of Minnesota. And so their workers' comp claims left with them, allowing the company to get out of their obligations.
Wow. You know, I've heard in northwestern Lower Peninsula of Michigan, since the immigration debate and real hostility towards undocumented workers here in the U.S., and not just undocumented workers, but just a hostility towards brown people, to be honest. There's a up in northwestern Michigan, where Traverse City is, where there's a huge cherry production area, tens of thousands of bushels of cherries, I think it was a couple of years ago, were left just by the side of the road. One of the farmers was trying to show how it was just being wasted because he couldn't harvest it, because he couldn't get in the undocumented workers for a temporary point, or documented workers for a small period of time, giving them a visa so they can work there. So he was incredibly upset about it, and the profiting in the cherry industry in Michigan was hurting for a little bit, or at least that summer it was. So how much is the meat processing industry hurting when it comes to restrictions on immigration, like the border fence? Or, I mean, are they doing any kind of campaign financing to push for immigration reform or to stop immigration reform?
Well, they would like to see immigration reform that would allow them to continue to take advantage of all of the positive aspects of the workforce that they've assembled. But it's a kind of high wire act for them, because they don't want the immigration reform to be so sweeping that it empowers the workforce too much. An interesting case study, there are a couple of companies. One of them is QPP that I mentioned before in Austin. Another is a company called Albert Lee Select Foods. Both of them are custom packers, as they call them, for Hormel. And they, in 2009, were investigated by Immigration and Customs Enforcement and told that they needed to get some of the undocumented workers on their payroll off by a certain time. What they did was strike an arrangement with the Karen Organization of Minnesota, which caters to refugees from Burma, and brought in hundreds of these workers from St. Paul to replace the Hispanic workers. The company thought that this was going to be the perfect workforce. They were still, culturally unfamiliar with Minnesota. They didn't speak the language very well. They didn't have a history of working in meatpacking, and had no ties to those local communities. But they had political refugee status, so they weren't subject to the same sorts of possibility of deportation that the undocumented workers from Mexico and Guatemala that they had been having at the plant. The problem, though, that where they miscalculated was that these workers from Burma had been very organized in their political opposition in Burma for generations, and that transposed very well to organizing and meatpacking. And they managed to unionize Albert Lee Select Foods in a fairly short period of time, and make all sorts of demands on the company. And so this is the sort of situation that Hormel and all of these meatpacking companies are trying to avoid. They're trying to figure out how to find a workforce that will work hard, work fast, but will also, not report injuries, will not file worker comp claims, won't ask for pay increases. And so the immigration reform that they're pressing for is at best a half measure, and it's certainly one where they're pushing the cause of self-interest.
So there's this shadowy world of the workers who are on the floor, on the kill floor in meat processing facilities. You write there's also no Emiliano Ballesta or Miriam Angeles or any of the other Hispanic workers who stood side by side with Matthew Garcia at the head table, because seemingly everyone working at QPP in the first decade of the new century had a fake name and false papers with a phony address. And not just the people on the kill floor. Quality Pork Processors is simply another way of saying Hormel, and QPP's corporate headquarters in Dallas is just an accounting firm, a mailing address, and a tax shelter in a poured concrete office park along the LBJ freeway. And if you leaf through the phone book in Austin, Minnesota, you can find a listing for Kelly Wadding, the CEO of QPP. But if you drive there, you'll find no house, no such address. Prior to your investigation, did you know that meat processing, of all things, was such a shadowy world?
I didn't think that it was this shadowy. No. I knew a little bit about this universe because my grandfather had worked in meatpacking in Omaha when he was young. And when I was a book editor, I had worked on a couple of books that had to do with the meatpacking industry. But everything that I knew about the world of meatpacking predated that sort of bright line that was created by the Hormel workers' strike in 85 and 86. And what I hadn't understood until coming into doing this research was that the whole industry had recalibrated in a way to make sure that there would never be a major strike like that again. And so everything that they do is aimed at trying to disempower the workforce in order to keep production rolling. But it also means that they are trying to forge alliances with government, with local officials, and it does create a sort of shadowy world that they operate in.
How much do the workers who are affected by, for instance, Matthew Garcia, who got sick, or the co-workers next to him, how quickly did they suspect their environment as the cause of their illness? Did you hear any of them making excuses, dismissing links to the work environment out of a necessity to rationalize the way that they make money?
Well, so the workers themselves had very little communication with each other as they became ill, and didn't know what was happening to them, much less what was happening more broadly. I would say that the company, to some extent, exploited that lack of communication among the workers because it allowed them to say, well, we didn't have that sort of report coming back to us. But the reality is that they have a plant occupational nurse who was recognizing a pattern among the workers. They had reports back from the Austin Medical Center that there were a number of people who were working in the plant and suffering from similar symptoms. And when the Minnesota Department of Health finally came and did a study and said, show us where each of these people works in the plant, they all worked side by side. And, it would seem to me that it doesn't take very much of a sleuthing ability to say that if there are all these people who work side by side who are suddenly showing the same symptoms of a severe injury, that there's something happening within the plant. But yes, in fact, initially the company questioned whether it was actually coming from inside the plant or not, and passed along that doubt to the insurance company in an effort to sort of collectively duck the obligations of paying out the workers' comp.
So we have the shadowy world of the ownership. We have the shadowy world of the employees. How shadowy, how covert does a meat processing facility have to be to get into a community? Because in your book, you write about how many communities are very upset about having meat processing facilities in their area because of the impact on their environment.
Yeah, well, and that's true. The environmental impact is considerable. I mean, just starting from the fact that if you have a plant that moves in, you've got sewage demands that from both the water intake and the wastewater. You've got huge power demands, all of those sorts of things. And typically, the plants are set up outside of municipalities so that they are not subject to local ordinances, but they draw from the local utilities. So there's often then, a deal that needs to be struck with the city government in order to get that sort of arrangement. And what it very often is saying, we'll pay into the local economy over time if you allow us to come in and make all these demands at first. And of course, what that does is put these communities permanently at disadvantage, right? Even if you're unhappy with what's happening at the packing plant, if you're going to sever that relationship, you're saying that you're going to take a financial hit, and very few politicians, even at the local level, are willing to do such a thing.
Yeah, and that's really the sad part is that we do not have any kind of political motivation to try to fix this problem. Have you had any reaction from Hormel? Because I would be suing your ass off and doing everything I could to make certain that this book was not published.
Well, Hormel, I have reported on Hormel for and published on Hormel for over 3 years now. In that time, I've never had direct communication with them aside from the very initial conversations where I asked them for access to any of their plants. And they have never issued any sort of public statements about anything I've published. And as I say, it's been coming out for years in pieces, and the book has been out for a little bit now, and the company has issued no response. I think Hormel's usual strategy is to say that they think that in a saturated media environment that it is so difficult to capture the attention of consumers that this sort of thing is not going to have an impact, and that rather than engage with it directly, they just pretend that it's not happening.
You also talk about PETA going undercover and discovering a lot of animal abuse, horrible working conditions, sexual abuse, actual sexual abuse of animals. And this all in the case of a farm that's run by a Lynn Becker. And folks, you got to get this book. I mean, there's a lot of disgusting stuff in it, but you better know what's going on in your food unless you want to not know and just be kind of goofy. How much of the worker or animal abuse that takes place on Hormel contracted suppliers' facilities do you think is caused by the demands of Hormel, not by some character flaw of the contract farm workers themselves? Do you think that their character becomes this character because of Hormel, or do you think it's just, hey, you're working in a kill floor, crazy stuff happens?
Well, I think in that particular facility, which is a giant breeding facility, a sow barn with about 6,000 breeding sows in Iowa, you've got a facility there where you're placing thousands of sows in gestation crates, and there's been a lot of attention on gestation crates recently. And so people may know these are crates that are essentially hog-sized containers. They're not large enough for the sows to turn around. Most of them are barely large enough for them to stand up. And the sows, once they are artificially inseminated, are kept in those crates for 114 days straight. It is at the end of that 114 days that they are gotten up and moved to another barn where they will give birth and will briefly nurse the piglets. You have to imagine what the attitude of an animal that's been caged for 114 days is when someone comes along and pokes it with a stick and tells it, now is the time for you to get up and move. And so the workers themselves are put in just a terrible situation because they are being faced with aggressive and angry animals that they then have to pick up and move. And the animals bite, they kick, they do their best to push the workers against the gates and injure them. And the workers often respond with violence. And in the case of this particular barn, all it took was one person with a kind of sadistic attitude to really kind of gain control of the workforce and convince everybody that this was the only way to deal with the animals and to kind of egg them on and get them sort of moving down the wrong path. So it's but as you say, all of this comes from the whole notion of line speed and trying to produce a lot of meat really fast, because it really is this thing of we've got to produce as many piglets as possible. We've got to get them fattened and ready for market as soon as possible. And everything is an artificial environment. And when you get these artificial systems, unusual and unexpected things start to happen. And to me, it seems unfair that a worker who has been spending a whole shift dealing with angry animals and often at physical risk, when he loses his temper, he faces criminal charges. But the people who created those conditions do not.
Two things that we've been reporting on and complaining about since we started airing the show in 1996 are deregulation, and the other is the overconcentration or centralization of any market into just a few big players. How much of the problem, then, when it comes to food safety, quality, worker safety, how many of those challenges are related to the overconcentration or centralization of the market? Because if one company's decision, one company's marketing strategy, like Hormel, can have such an impact, it must not only be integral to the market, but the market would have to depend on that economy for its overall well-being. So how much of the problem is just centralization?
That's sort of at the core of all of this, because it would be much easier for small producers who offer alternatives to compete in the market if the market weren't so centralized. And because it is centralized and those few producers have such sway in the marketplace, they are very much able to keep the smaller producers from competing at the farm level, from competing at the production level, but also keep them from being able to distribute their product and to compete against these large producers. So it which leads to your other point, that what is really required is government intervention to say we need to level the playing field here, and not just in the interest of business fairness, but in the interest of consumer safety, in the interest of worker safety and environmental safety. And this is the role of government, after all, is to make sure that the citizens' interests are protected.
You know, one of the things I was thinking about was I really don't like hot dogs. I like bratwurst, Thuringer, I like a lot of sausages, but I really don't like hot dogs. But I do like a hot dog if, like, I'm at Wrigley Field and I've had, like, 4 Old Styles in me. All of a sudden, a hot dog with mustard sounds delicious. But otherwise, they're pretty disgusting. But I was watching the show the other day, and I think it was America's Test Kitchen, or I can't remember what the hell the show was, but they were talking about how they were doing taste tests and comparison and quality of the meat of hot dogs, and the guy was saying, look, just buy a kosher hot dog. If you buy a kosher hot dog, it is so much better than everything else. So, Ted, what if all meat processing facilities had strict kosher or even halal codes that they followed? Would that mean then we would have much safer facilities and much healthier food?
I'm sorry to say that there some of the worst violations, especially of worker rights, have occurred in such facilities. It's no way of judging, and this is just the thing, is that I wish desperately that it were as simple as telling people, look for this on the label, look for that, and you'll be supporting something headed in the right direction. The reality is that while we as individual consumers can make health choices about the kind of food that we want to feed our families and ourselves, if we're talking about trying to affect larger change to improve the way that the food is produced and the way that people who are producing that food are treated, we need to do that at the ballot box, not at the grocery store.
So, wait, Ted, I think you're telling me that I can't become Jewish, Muslim, or vegan because that doesn't solve the problem?
Well, as I say, it may solve some of the problems for you personally, but what I would like to see is
more religion in my life. Is that what you're getting at?
What I would like to see is sort of a broader view of things, where we're not just trying to improve our own food, we're trying to improve everyone's food, and we're not just trying to improve the bottom line for us at the grocery store, but trying to improve the lives of all the people who feed us.
So if the next time the economy goes down, I mean, it sounds like, Hormel, I believe you said that Hormel is also makers of Campbell's Soup. That you've always heard the thing about the Campbell's Soup idea when it comes to stock investment, and that as soon as the economy tanks, you're supposed to invest in Campbell's Soup because that stock will usually go up. So the next time the economy tanks, are you going to start investing in things like Hormel because they make Spam?
Well, they've always said that Hormel products and Spam in particular are a great indicator of where the economy stands, and the sales of Spam in particular go way up when the economy's down, and there are all kinds of people out there on those sort of CNBC shout shows where you have somebody like Jim Cramer who is telling you that while the economy's down, you need to invest in these kinds of companies. And, for people who have money to invest in the market, I'm sure it is a way to make a quick buck. But again, there's something I would think that people would find sort of morally questionable about making a buck in a down economy on the backs of the people who are forced to work in a system that is working against their interests. Instead, I would say that the economy could be boosted by raising the wages, improving the conditions for those workers so that they have greater buying power and can participate in the economy.
We have been speaking with 2014 winner of the National Press Club Award and James Aronson Award for Social Justice Journalism, Ted Genoways. Ted has a new book out entitled The Chain, Farm, Factory, and the Fate of Our Food. And one aspect there's a lot of this book that we didn't cover today, but the history of Hormel and the history of Spam is a really, really disturbing part of this book. I'd put it at about 27th on the disturbing things in this book, because there are a lot of disturbing things in this book. One last question for you, Ted, and as always, it's the question from hell, the question we hate to ask, you might hate to answer, or our audience is going to hate the response. We had I cannot believe I can't remember her name now. Oh, it's driving me nuts. Author, she had put out a book about the way in which housework had changed. She's a writer for Salon.com. I can't remember her name. Anyway, she had made this point in her book that food was safer today than it was back in 1900. And the reason that she said food was safer today than it was back in 1900 is because there are food regulations in place today that weren't happening back in 1900. So there were cases, like she pointed out, a case in Chicago, of milk being tainted with paint that was being distributed in the inner cities before regulations, and people getting incredibly ill, and an inability to track that milk back to the processor, because they're all small farm processors. There wasn't some big centralized place. So then regulations get put into place and food becomes safer. But then you centralize the food distribution market, and all of a sudden one mistake at one place could mean less safe food for everybody. So I know that this is going to be a complicated answer, but is food safer today than it was during the time of Upton Sinclair and the Jungle?
Well, the simple answer to that is it's safer than it was in 1900 or 1906 when Upton Sinclair was doing his work. But I think the more complicated question is not is food safety improved over what it was a century ago, but is food safety improved over what it was a decade ago? And I would say that we made many advances in food safety, and some of those advances are still very much in place. But right now we are in an era that the industry is attempting to deregulate and is succeeding in deregulating especially the meat industry, but all parts of food production. And so to me, it seems a bit of a red herring to say, well, things are better than they were a century ago. Well, I would hope so. I think that we certainly have much better knowledge of medicine and science and all of the things that are part of food safety. But what concerns me is I'm not convinced that our food is as safe now as it was 10 or 15 years ago because of the loosening of regulation. And I think that should be a cause for concern.
And here's one more great tease for Ted's book. Again, Ted Genoway is the author of The Chain, Farm, Factory, and the Fate of Our Food. Find out how the creation of Spam wasn't driven by consumer demand, but was driven by a business model. Read his book to find out all the disturbing things. You'll never want to ever see a Spam cooking contest again. Ted, it's always a pleasure to have you on the show. When the book comes out in paperback, I know you'll have new material. I've got your email address, so I'll bug you to get you back on the show.
That sounds great. I'd love to be back.
All right, take care, Ted.
Thank you.
This is Hell, every Saturday morning at 9 a.m. We're going till 1 p.m. Alex, people are just about to win something from us. Isn't it some Red Moon Celebration 2014 passes?
Yeah, I believe it is, and maybe you want to go more into that, because I actually don't have that information. I have how they can win.
All right, I'll let you tell them how you can win in just a second. This fall, Red Moon's family event, Celebration, which debuted with great success last year. I want to tell you, this is their press release. This is not my opinion, because I didn't see it, so I don't know. Returns for its second annual installment of experimental exploration. Families are invited into its otherworldly playground inside Red Moon's Pilsen home, 2120 South Jefferson Street. I saw their spring spectacular there, and it was fantastic. Dan Cox went with me to it. It was fantastic. For a reinvention of the seasonal rituals of Halloween, creativity, imagination, and a sense of adventure are celebrated with interactive experiences, immersive encounters, creative snacks, and imaginative music. This year directed by Casey Foster, under conceptual direction by Red Moon, producing artistic director Frank Malgary. The event runs over this weekend and next weekend. It's on Saturdays and Sundays, October 18th and October 19th, as well as October 25th and 26th. Celebration includes Red Moon's Celestial Swing, the UFO Carousel, Red Moon's Spectacle Hall, Red Moon's Cartoon Adventure. Also, families can picnic in the man-made lagoon, the premiere of Red Moon's newest food service device, the Pastry Wheel. Performers roam the space serving delightful treats, including signature Red Moon mechanical marvels such as the floating trays. Families can enter Red Moon's haunted sideshow-like series of rooms known as the Devils in the Details, which hold eerie, humorous, and sensual experiences. So, it's a weird thing. Who knew that Red Moon would be doing some weird thing in their gigantic space? So it's Celebration 2014 happening this Saturday and Sunday, as well as next Saturday and Sunday. Alex, how can people win passes?
Okay. If you haven't already subscribed to the This Is Hell, That Was Hell... Oh, hold on a second.
You got something going on back there. What do you do? Oh, it's your phone. It's
Yeah,
your
it's my phone because I have to play it off of my phone in order to get Jeff on. Jeff is actually not on. We're gonna wait till call him.
Kill that thing. Isn't it great that we have to use a phone here at the station to use?
If you saw how many cracks were in my phone too, you'd okay. Anyway, so sorry everyone. The winner of the way to win this giveaway is to already be a subscriber to the That Was Hell newsletter, in which we send out segments and links to the show every Monday. So this is going to be for people who have already subscribed or people who have a time machine to get into your time machine now, go back to last week and subscribe to the newsletter, because the way to win is hidden in the bottom of the most current newsletter. So the most current newsletter that had the that you would have gotten from me with the
Aaron Dottie Roy.
Yeah, sorry. So the Aaron Dottie Roy
Subject line.
And Tanya Brannigan email. At the very bottom of that email, hidden in little gray text, is one word. We will take I think two people are winning this, right?
No, two passes to one person.
Okay. So be the first person to email me, alex@thisishell.com, alex@thisishell.com, with the one word that I hid in the most recent That Was Hell newsletter, and you will win the prize.
You'll win passes to Celebration 2014. Those passes, I believe, are good for this Saturday and Sunday. I'm not too sure about next Saturday and Sunday. They might be. I'm betting that they're good for both weekends, because when I went to the spring celebration, it wasn't sold out. Maybe this one will be. Who knows? There's maybe greater demand. But I believe the passes are good for this weekend, but Celebration happens this weekend as well as next weekend. You want to find out more, just go to Red Moon's website, which I believe is redmoon.org. And not only is Red Moon doing that weirdness this weekend and next, but on Halloween night, they're doing something called Bone Shaker 2014. Red Moon's wildly popular costume party, Bone Shaker, returns for its 5th annual spectacular installment. So you can find out about all of this stuff by just going to Red Moon's website and finding out more. All right, let's see. What else do I have to do? Question from Al after Jeffy. Twist Off Knowledge. You want to do Twist Off now or after Jeffy?
Yeah, let's do it now. Just give me a second to load it up.
All right. All right. Ready? National Beer is the only beer. Whoops, no, I'm not ready. National Beer is the only beer that comes in a can with a twist-off cap. Inside that cap is a hieroglyph, a pictograph, a rebus, if you will, to impart onto you, the soon-to-be drunk drinker of National Beer, a little bit of twist-off knowledge. Let me pour some of this here first. I really need some. Oh, that's going to taste good. So let's hear it from the great folks over at National Beer.
Good friends take time. Good food takes time. And National Beer takes time. Yes, that takes time too.
Eddie Vedder's, everybody.
Oh, it all takes time. So let's all
God, that beer is horrible.
take time
Oh, that's awful.
to have the tasty
Good Lord.
National Beer.
What the hell is going on at National Beer? All right, let's see if we can figure this one out. Oh, it looks like Antlers. A light switch in the on position. Bambi and Disney. You can sue National Beer, not me, for the clear copyright infringement. A crucifix, plus the logo for the global financial giant ING. A person holding their hands out with arrows pointing around and then signaling direction as if they were doing American Sign Language. The letter R and the word words, but it is completely backwards. Let me see if we can figure this one out. Antlers on Bambi crossing. Oh, yeah, there's that. Crossing sign R. Oh, the antlers on deer crossing signs are backwards. Look at any deer crossing sign. The antlers are backwards. We wouldn't be doing our due diligence if we gave you a hangover cure and twist-off knowledge without offering a libation of the week. So this week's libation of the week is resin. No, not that disgusting stuff your bong leaves behind that only Formula 420 can get out, but the beer by New York 6 Point Brewery. It's one of their year-round offerings and comes in a slim 12-ounce can, but has that strong, hoppy flavor I love. 6 Point says, we zeroed in on the botanical structure of the hop cone to get to the essence of this beer. When hops are at their peak maturity, their cores swell up with a sticky, golden, resinous substance that is the flavor you crave from an IPA. With an IBU of 103, that scale is only supposed to go up to 100. With an IBU of 103 and ABV, alcohol by volume, of 9.1%, resin can be loosely described as a double IPA, but rarely do 6 Point beers adhere to any strict style demands. Now, that's one of the things I was saying I love about Surly Brewing up in Minnesota, and it's one of the things I love about 6 Point. They don't put traditional beer flavor names on their product. The last time we had our beer correspondent, Michael Roper of the Hop Leaf, on the show, he was lamenting the adherence to labels like India Pale Ale when making something that is black in color. I mean, how can a India Pale Ale be a black India Pale Ale? Not that I'm racist or that there's anything wrong with that kind of thing. So know that resin is hoppy, it's strong, its IBUs are literally off the chart, and it's our libation of the week. If you have any suggestions for the libation of the week, send them to chuck@thisishell.com. I know we have Jeffy.
1, 2, you know what to do. One more time.
The moment of truth, 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 the moment of truth.
Welcome to the moment of truth, the thirst that is the drink. That's how I tried to begin this week's moment of truth. I thought, I'll talk about the, and then the wordscape in my mind was suddenly barren, just the. I became pre-verbal, I think. I turned to the left, there is the. I turn to the right, there is the. I look ahead, the. I look behind, the. Up, the. And down, the. We have the definite article. Just imagine if we didn't. We would certainly be speaking some other language. And just what language are we speaking? I've heard it called English. I would love to go somewhere magical in English with the. Maybe I will someday. Maybe I already have. I probably already have. A long, long time ago, I daydreamed of a life lived on my own terms. But I had no terms. I only had things I wanted to avoid. I wanted to avoid responsibility, growing up, getting a driver's license, filling out a draft registration, getting insurance, paying a mortgage, being trapped in a job. Navigating civilization is a skill. Some have a talent for it. I don't. I could have developed one. Perhaps I still might. For some reason, I believed I could navigate civilization in a homemade birch bark canoe with a homemade map, or a map I would make as I went. What I am now is a skick drawn downstream in a lazy current. I bump around rocks and swirl in eddies, get hung up in reeds for a while, and that's about it. I got a fortune cookie yesterday. It said, "Many good things will come to you thanks to your charm." Just a twig floating downstream, that's me. You may well wonder just how this is going to turn political. Well, personal is political, right? And who isn't lost these days? Many. Many are not lost. So many have their minds made up. I don't know how they do it. Listeners to this show have experience with me when I'm lost. I ramble. I talk about meaninglessness. I've been on a meaninglessness kick recently, where I cram about nonsense and how nonsensical it all is, but I always get around to making some kind of point or other. Let's pretend this time is different. Let's pretend I'm not searching for any grand or baby grand concept to tie this mess together. Pop linguist Steven Pinker claims we're living in less violent times than ever before. So as usual, I ask myself if that's an indication we're actually progressing as a species. It's a question I pose to myself a lot. Then I wonder, what do other species do besides progress? Do other species progress? They don't, really. So why should we? What makes us so hung up on progress, growth, moving forward and upward? I guess it's because life is at bottom utterly boring and repetitive when it's not dangerous and booby-trapped with crises. Other species just don't know it. We know it. I don't know where we got our clue from and why other species remain so clueless. I had a dog who was usually bored. Occasionally he was scared, especially of fireworks. When his boredom was interrupted with something he could get excited about, he dutifully got excited. But at no time did he or his kind ever try to manipulate circumstances to permanently defeat what bored or terrified them. What is it with us? All this striving to change. Steven Pinker says we have changed. Okay. I'm very pleased to be living in times where we've conquered darkness with electric light and physical exertion with bikes and cars. I'd rather be alive now than back 600 years ago in medieval Europe. So I can't say our striving hasn't had a positive effect, but I still wonder, why is that important? Why do we want so much to transform present conditions into ones we can call better? Let's leave this world a better place, better than we found it. Why exactly? Has anyone done so for us? According to Steven Pinker, yes. But according to climate scientists, we've bettered ourselves until we're almost extinct. We killed dumber, less ambitious species until they're erased from existence, and now our world might change so catastrophically we won't be able to live on it. Does this mean there's always a trade-off leading to a steady state of no defeat, no victory? For every advance, there's an unpleasant repercussion, an equal and opposite reaction. For every good, a bad? Sounds like magical thinking. I don't believe in magic. Not in that particular way. But even as a passive floating twig, I've advanced. I'm older. I can play guitar and banjo better. I'm more helpful to people in need. I'm less self-destructive, nervous, and self-pitying, and I have more friends. Yet I still have no ambition. I'm no more ambitious than my dog was. My species puts a lot of emphasis on progress, though, and they're dragging me along in their wake, I guess. Yet I'm not alone in feeling ambivalent about human progress, and I wonder if in our heart of hearts we're not all secretly aware of how farcical our busy civilization is, running around plugging holes in our sinking ship, albeit it's a nicer ship with fancier amenities every new day. Aren't we getting exhausted? Maybe I'm a new kind of human, Homo lethargus. Next step in evolution, Homo lethargus. Check me out with my aimless floating. Wouldn't that be ironic if progress was humanity realizing how futile our focus on progress is? It wouldn't have to mean an end to great inventions like better ice cream and breeding geese who willingly gorge enough to make foie gras voluntarily, and of course, flying cars. It would just mean not having to give such a giant hairy crap about those things, and maybe using them a little less excessively. Giving up when giving up is a good idea. Life is too short to waste time trying to get the most out of it. A couple of weeks ago, a friend and I were at some kind of gathering, a party at the San Diego Zoo thrown by an arts organization my friend had volunteered for, and it came time for people to break into teams for a scavenger hunt. A couple of people on our team took leadership roles, where they weren't any more knowledgeable about the zoo than anyone else on our team. And in such situations, one can choose to try to set their team's leaders straight when they're clearly taking everyone on the wrong course, or not. While I tend to challenge authority almost as a reflex, it's usually only when said authority interferes with my minding my own business. When it comes to team-oriented party games, I become exceptionally gracious. I just say to myself or my like-minded friend, looks like those two idiots are in charge. Let's go for a walk and look at animals. I don't feel like struggling. So we look at animals. We find they're lazy, unambitious, and clueless. Can we learn from them? Probably not. Can they learn from us? No. I don't mean any disrespect to those of you involved in turning this into a better world. And if you have leadership skills and honestly believe you can help others by exercising them, please do. I do respect you. I support you. But I also urge you not to get ahead of yourselves. Don't bite off more than you can chew. And remember to stop and smell the animals. It's the sweet smell of success, even as they slowly go extinct. And who is so successful that they're not slowly going extinct? This has been the moment of truth. Good day.
Hey, before I forget, I want to thank
Don't forget.
I want to thank one of our listeners. Let me screw around with my mic for a moment. I want to thank one of our listeners, Robert, completely unsolicited. Yet again, he has donated something to the show, and I cannot thank him enough. It's something that we haven't ever asked for on the air. We're not even allowed to, but every so often, Robert sends us something, and we all truly and deeply appreciate it. It really helps out the show's bottom line. But Jeffy, I got a question for you real quick.
I wonder what it is.
I can't talk about it on the air.
Edible panties?
I wish. Do you say panties or planties?
I say pranties.
You know the CBS News anchor every morning on WBBM 780 All News AM and all around the country, CBS Radio News. The anchor in the morning, his name is Frank Setapanti.
Wow.
Is that awesome?
Does anyone ever say, oh, forget it. I have to work on the joke that I'm working on.
Honest underwear, really? Honest underwear? Yeah, and then Felicia Middlebrooks, the WBBM anchor, she always says stuff like, get up and get going, and I just want to punch her through the damn radio. Hey, this Kill the Messenger movie came...
I'm Shay Steven.
Jeremy Renner is in the Kill the Messenger movie, the Gary Webb movie.
Yes. I saw the trailer for it.
I was going to ask...
I'm very excited.
So you don't get copies until they are nominated for Academy Awards? Is that the deal?
No. I don't know how they decide when to send them out. And actually, I'm in arrears at the Guild, so I might not get any this year. I better pay my dues.
I see.
If I want to see the movie.
Because I want you to review that movie for me. I was going to have Elvis do it, but he's so conspiracy cocked up, you know? I'd rather have you do it.
I'll see what I can do.
All right, man.
It's not out yet. I don't get advance copies.
I thought it came out last Friday.
Oh, no, I don't think it's open yet, darling.
Okay. Yeah. And thank you for calling.
Maybe. Okay.
Thank you for calling me darling. I really appreciate that. Jeremy, you big fan of Jeremy Renner?
Am I a big fan of Jeremy Renner? Not particularly.
No, neither am I.
I don't know what I don't like about him. I think he was so good in the Hurt Locker that kind of pissed me off. I kind of didn't like them.
Well, you'll be surprised to learn that as the new Jason Bourne, that movie's storyline has not changed at all.
Yeah, I heard that was wretched.
Yeah. All right, Jeffy, until next week.
What?
Stay beautiful.
Oh, okay.
All right, see you then. Don't forget, Naomi Klein is going to be appearing here in Chicago a week from Wednesday. It's Capitalism versus the Climate. She'll be speaking at the Drake Hotel, 140 East Walton Place, Wednesday, October 29th, beginning at 5:30. She'll be signing books at 7:15. If you're one of the people who want a copy of her book, This Changes Everything, Capitalism versus Climate Change, then you should go get tickets to this. I believe they're $20 if you're not a member of the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. Go search on the Chicago Council on Global Affairs and find out when Naomi is doing her thing, because I do not have the link with me or the URL to share it with you, but I can tell you, you will have yet another opportunity to win a copy of Naomi Klein's book, This Changes Everything, Capitalism versus Climate Change. The two best answers to this week's question from hell, which we will announce on next week's show. I'll be posting this question from hell at our site as soon as I get home. Our question from hell for you, our listening audience, we'll be posting it at the Facebook page, sorry about that, is: how does white entitlement help you? Or when does white entitlement help you? And if you're not white, when or how do you think white entitlement helps white people? So there you go. There's our question from hell related to our first guest this morning, Kevin Alexander Gray. I want to thank all of our guests, Kevin Alexander Gray, Katha Pollitt, and Ted Genoways, as well as our new irregular correspondent, Anuradha Mittal, who will be reporting to us on development, and Elvis DeMaro, who was skulking around the conspiracy corner today, and he wants to make sure that you know not just about Kill the Messenger, the new movie on Gary Webb, who we interviewed back in 1998, and we have that interview now up on SoundCloud, but Elvis also wants you to know about Freeway Crack in the System, which is going to be a new documentary that's going to be coming out very shortly, and he thinks it just might be a YouTube deal. Don't forget, tonight is the last night of the new Theodore Oobleck show, Baudelaire in a Box, Episode 7, The King of Rain. It happens tonight at 8 o'clock at the Charnel House, 3421 West Fullerton. Here in Chicago, $15 suggested donation. More if you've got it, free if you're broke. Find out more by going to Theodore Oobleck, OOBLECK.com. Also, don't forget about Red Moon Celebration this weekend and next. Next week, Academy Award nominee George Polk Book Award winner and co-founding editor of The Intercept, Jeremy Scahill, will be our guest. One of our guests. Jeremy will be speaking at the 35th annual dinner celebration for Chicago Area Peace Action. It's a dinner and conversation with Jeremy Scahill, and it takes place Saturday, November 1st at 6 p.m. at the St. Francis Xavier Parish Gym, 549 9th Street in Wilmette. Tickets for just the program start at $20. For the dinner, start at $75. For more information, go to chaipeaceaction.org. Also on next week's show, Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz, author of the recently released An Indigenous People's History of the United States. I'm your bitter, blind, broke, gap-toothed radio show host, Chuck Mertz. There's only one way to get over all of the problems that we've introduced on this morning's show. That's by sitting down in the lotus position, turning your palms towards the sky, focusing on that burning white dot in the middle of your forehead, and saying the simple words, everybody's stupid.
My demon is on my butt.
Yeah.
My
That's
demon
not Matt
talks to
Damon,
me
that's Jeremy
profanity like a sailor. And my demon tries to knock me down. And my demon tries to put me on a hell ride.